Chapter 820. When the planar war reached the 5th hour, the Thunder Rock assault team, which had arrived late, hurriedly joined the battle. This also indicated that the cruel and bloody battle of attrition on the ground had lost its meaning, and the focus of the war had shifted from the ground to the sky. The Beastmen had gathered a total of 60 experts that were at least grade 3, and most of them were sturdy Beastman warriors and shamans. The rest were experts from other races. The Beastman warriors and shamans were either riding on mammoth war elephants or Thunder Rock. They charged wildly from both the ground and the sky towards the tall teleportation gate that was still swallowing the otherworld creatures. The real battle that would decide the outcome of this planar war had just begun. Perhaps it was because the witches saw that the Beastmen had turned out in full force, but they didn't hold back any longer, and they used all sorts of methods to fly into the sky. Among them, the leader of the Witches of Death, Thuna, was the most eye-catching. She rode on the grade 4 zombie dragon Arteist and soared into the sky, blocking the Beastmen's path. The planar war had always been a battle of life and death, and there was no possibility of peaceful coexistence. Hence, there was no need for both sides to talk or negotiate, and they immediately took up their stances and charged at each other the moment they met. One had to admit that the Beastman warriors were brave and fierce, and their offensive power was off the charts after reaching the high tier. They could kill anything that stood in their way. Unfortunately, they still had a huge flaw. They couldn't fly, and they couldn't launch long-range attacks. The Beastman warriors were like natural elemental insulators, and the number of Beastmen that could grasp the elemental innate talent to become shamans was less than 1 in 10,000, and the probability was 1 in 20 for the humans and 1 in 400 for the elves. Hence, even after the Beastman warriors advanced to the high tier, they couldn't convert their life energy into a powerful battle energy like the humans and elves, and they couldn't grasp some powerful short-range combat skills. Even if they advanced to the high tier, they would only gain a stronger physique, stronger explosive power, and better magic resistance and recovery. Apart from that, they had nothing. The witches weren't afraid of such high-tier warriors, even if they were battle gods. Both sides quickly approached each other in the sky, and when they were less than 500 meters apart, the first wave of long-range attacks exploded. On the Orc camp side, only the 30 Thunder Rocks and the Orc shamans could launch long-range attacks. Before the dazzling thunderstorm and huge fireballs could even get close to the witches, they were engulfed by a wave of even more gorgeous and terrifying witchcraft torrent. The Orcs then took the opportunity to wipe out the entire Orc assault troop. The grade 3 Thunder Rocks were still able to conjure up lightning barriers to protect themselves and the Orcs on their backs, enduring the violent waves of witchcraft. The lightning barrier around the level 2 Thunder Rock did not even last for 3 seconds before it exploded into a storm of lightning. The Thunder Rock players could only groan in pain as they hurriedly dodged the frightening spells. As for the many experts of the eagle-bodied people who were following closely behind Lei Peng, they flapped their wings and flew swiftly, charging left and right amidst the dense and misty witchcraft attacks. They did not have magic to protect their bodies, nor did they have the protection of scales. Their soft and fragile wings were swept by the aftermath of witchcraft, and they screamed and fell to the ground. A fall of less than 100 meters in the air was not enough to kill them, but what awaited them below were ugly zombies who looked up at the sky and let out strange cries. With just this one attack, the Orc assault troop had lost a third of its strength. Those who fell from the sky would have to cross the battlefield space of almost 1,000 meters in order to reach the teleportation gate, as well as the countless terrifying undead that filled the gap. Don't think that these strange cries of undead with sticky saliva in their mouths are easy to deal with. No one knew where the high-level undead that were as high as grade 3 or 4 were hidden within their dense ranks. The low-profile liches could casually use Finger of Death or Order, Death to instantly kill those unlucky fellows who did not have enough mental fortitude. The Orcs who only focused on training their physical bodies and rarely trained their mental fortitude were undoubtedly such unlucky fellows. The spell Battle in the Sky had undoubtedly attracted Grimm's attention, but what attracted him even more was the falling grade 3 Orcs. In the Magus world, the chances of finding a grade 3 being to fight was extremely slim. Even if there was one, it usually meant that the Crimson family was facing a crisis of life and death. They would never be like this, looking around the world for the easiest grade 3 orcs to deal with. That thing that's making a ruckus and falling from the sky with half its body burnt black seems to be an orc sword saint. No, I can't choose it. The sword saint's attacks are too powerful, and few in the troop can withstand its violent attacks. Another grade 3 thunder rock has fallen from the sky. No, there's another orc on its back, and that fellow seems to be a grade 4 orc. Amidst the rain of food, Grimm's black eyes flickered with blue light as he quickly analyzed the basic strength of each orc. Most of the orcs had a powerful life force surrounding them, distorting the AI chip's detection ripples and preventing him from obtaining detailed data. However, with the AI chip's blurry feedback, Grimm did his best to search for targets that were not too dangerous in the glaring red light. After all, they had come to the Johnson Plain under the banner of the Witches of Destiny. If they did not have any results, they would not be able to hold their heads up high in the Witches' internal department. Previously, helping the Witches to kill those low-level orcs could only be regarded as basic hard work. Only by doing their best to kill the enemy's high-level existences in this high-intensity dimensional war could the best measure of the auxiliary force's success. Hence, after weighing the basic strength of his side, Grimm boldly locked onto the lone grade 3 orcs. What are you waiting for? Shouldn't you be charging in now? There's so much delicious food here today. Mary, who was standing by his side, licked her red lips with an impatient look on her face. Her crimson eyes roamed around the plump blood food as she struggled to make a choice. Alice had a sweet smile on her face as she curiously looked at Grimm. In truth, although she was a witch of destiny and could see through the lives of most beings, she could not understand this male magus in front of her. She had already discovered Grimm's unique soul characteristics a long time ago. As long as her prophecy was related to Grimm, there would be strange distortions and unpredictable changes in her prophecy. This abnormality was not man-made, but the protection of the laws of the plane. This meant that anyone who tried to predict Grimm's secrets would only get the wrong answer. It was not just him. Even the people around him would be affected by this unpredictable characteristic, becoming anomalies that deviated from their original paths of destiny. Mary, for example, would not be able to advance to become a magus according to her path of destiny. She would die as an acolyte. But now, it was the same for Alice. Alice had predicted countless times that her path of destiny would stop the moment the Tower of Destiny opened. However, because she accidentally met Grimm and became his sole slave, her path of destiny deviated unpredictably. The chain reaction caused by this deviation was too huge, so huge that even the first Witch of Destiny who had stepped into the plane of void had a hard time dealing with it. After becoming a Witch of Destiny, Alice had countless chances to cut off the soul contract between her and Grimm. But after thinking about it, Alice silently gave up. Without the protection of Grimm, the black hole of destiny, she did not have the confidence to fight against an old monster who had lived for tens of thousands of years. Alice knew very well that her biggest bargaining chip against the old monster was not her identity as a Witch of Destiny, nor her many subordinates. It was Grimm. Therefore, all along, she had tied her fate tightly with Grimm's. Although there was love involved, it was more of an instinct from the soul and the guidance of the power of destiny. Since fate had brought them together and allowed them to support each other, she could only accept her fate. While Alice was smiling with complicated emotions, the rest of the Crimson Magi looked at Grimm with trust in their eyes. They believed in their patriarch. They believed in his choices and judgment. Under his leadership, the rise of the Crimson family was unstoppable and inevitable. They were the witnesses and creators of this miracle, and they shared the glory. Under the gazes of his companions and subordinates, Grimm, who was as still as a mountain, trembled. He had finally found a suitable target, a grade 3 Orc Shaman and a grade 2 Thunder Rock. Although this combination was different from what he had planned, it was still within the Crimson family's hunting range. Grimm immediately issued a series of orders without hesitation. The cloned Brain Grimm, who was slowly advancing through the tide of which corpses, immediately had a clear map of the battlefield appear in his mind. Under his command, 300 magic archers immediately turned around and began to fire at the predetermined area. The dense, scorching rays instantly covered the area where the Grade 3 Orc Shaman had fallen. At the same time, the Crimson Magi who had been hiding near the teleportation portal began to move towards the area. Chapter 8:21. Although the appearance of a Tier 3 Thunder Dragon wasn't the most powerful, it was definitely the most eye-catching. Under the watchful eyes of tens of thousands of people, a huge dragon camel with dazzling lightning radiating from its body carried a tall man on its back. It rushed into the battlefield in an astonishing manner. They didn't interfere in the colorful battle in the sky. Instead, they pounced on the Orc Shaman who was struggling to pull himself out of a deep pit of rubble. Beside the Orc Shaman, a thunder rock with terrifying black smoke curling around its body was struggling with all its might. The thunder rock was on the verge of death, but the Tier 3 Orc Shaman was still unscathed. One had to admit that the physique of the Orc Shaman was like a bug. After falling from a height of over 100 meters, the Orc Shaman only suffered some superficial wounds. After some simple treatment, the Orc Shaman was once again full of vigor and vigor. The Orc Shaman had just regained consciousness when he was caught unprepared by the concentrated scorching rays that were shooting towards him. However, the Orc Shaman only raised the goat horn staff in his left hand to protect his face against the elemental rays. He easily resisted the attacks with his strong physique. The concentrated scorching rays left countless red dots on the Orc Shaman's greenish-brown body, but it was obvious that they couldn't penetrate the Orc Shaman's tough, keratinized skin. The Orc Shaman narrowed his eyes through a small crack on his goat horn staff. He calmly and steadily watched the strange pair pouncing towards him. Dragon and wizard? One was a Tier 3, and the other was a Tier 2. The Tier 3 dragon was most likely the Tier 2 wizard's contract partner. As long as he killed the wizard in time, the Tier 3 dragon would be forced to return to its original plane. None of the Tier 3 existences were fools. Almost as soon as he sensed Grimm and Arm's presence, the Orc Shaman had already formulated a feasible battle plan in his mind. The area where the Orc Shaman had fallen was the most intense battle between the zombie tide and the Orc army. However, with the scorching rays clearing the area, not a single creature dared to step within 50 meters of the Orc Shaman. The Orc Shaman didn't dare to be negligent. With a wave of his huge rough palm, he quickly inserted the 5 totem poles into the ground beside him. 4 of them were the 4 elemental totem poles. They were inserted 2 meters away from the 4 corners of his body. Red, white, green, and yellow elemental halos overflowed from them. The 5th one was inserted in front of its eyes. The strange totem engraved on it resonated with the tattoos on its body and began to expand and contract in resonance. Under the amplification of this strange totem, the Orc Shaman's strength, vitality, agility, and spirit began to soar. Even from afar, Grimm was shocked to discover that although Kieran was still at rank 3, his lesser rank had risen from elementary to advanced. My goodness, I've directly increased my rank by 2 small levels. Grimm's eyes immediately narrowed. Sure enough, there wasn't anyone easy to deal with on the alternate plane battlefield. This fellow that he had carefully selected didn't seem to be easy to deal with. If it had been half a year ago, Grimm would definitely have turned around and left upon seeing such a ruthless character. But today, he was fully confident that he could obtain victory. Part of this was due to the rank 3 Lightning Dragon arms. But the more important reason was that he had just completed the Blazing Flame Monarch set, 5-piece set. Once the set is complete, it will automatically form a burning domain. All non-fire elemental spells will be forbidden within 50 meters of the wearer. Anyone who casts a spell within the burning domain will temporarily forget the spell after the spell is successfully cast. Anyone who moves within the burning domain will suffer the punishment of being ignited. After hiding in the wizard's pagoda and working day and night, he had finally managed to create the 5-piece Blazing Flame Monarch set before the start of the Dimensional War. The 5-piece set, which had all of its abilities activated, did not disappoint Grimm's expectations and allowed him to become even more powerful. After the AI chip's appraisal and data collection, Grimm was pleasantly surprised to discover that each of the 5 pieces of the Blazing Flame Monarch set was a rank 2 Magus weapon, but when they were combined, they were no less powerful than a rank 3 Magus weapon. This meant that Grimm, who was at rank 2, had a powerful ability that could threaten a rank 3 wizard weapon. The rank 3 lightning dragon opened its mouth and spat out a dazzling bolt of lightning, heading straight for the Beastman shaman, who was ready for battle. Grimm appeared in a flash of flames, appearing 30 meters in front of the Beastman shaman with a loud boom. Powerful and scorching elemental flames spewed from Grimm's huge body, scorching the earth and air. The densely packed gravel began to soften under the scorching heat, and the entire ground became scorched. The Beastman shaman was less than 2 meters tall, but Grimm, who had transformed twice into a terrifying flame demon, was more than 5 meters tall. Its gigantic body was covered in scorching red lava and raging elemental flames. Anyone who got a little closer to it would feel suffocated by the heat waves that assaulted their faces. The Beastman shaman immediately shot a ray of light at the bright red totem in front of him, and a dazzling red light burst forth from within. In the blink of an eye, 3 flame shields surrounded the orc shaman's body, protecting it from the heat wave and the flow of flames. That was not the end. As the orc shaman's palms shot out a thick wave of light towards another earthen yellow totem pole, a 7-meter-tall earth elemental giant crawled out from the ground and stood in front of it. The Tier 3 Thunder Dragon's lightning breath slammed into the earth elemental's massive body. The violent lightning elemental and the gentle earth elemental collided violently. Less than 5 seconds after the Tier 2 advanced earth elemental appeared, it disintegrated into a cloud of yellow smoke and disappeared from the battlefield. However, the Beastman shaman had already condensed a huge elemental fireball and threw it at the lightning dragon. The elemental fireball's level might not be high, only at the 2nd level, but the intensity of the energy contained within it was more than 600 degrees. If the fireball landed, it would be enough to make the lightning dragon suffer for a long time. Grimm, who was standing 30 meters away, chuckled coldly as he strode towards the orc shaman with heavy steps. The burning domain outside his body extended and enveloped the orc shaman, who was holding the fireball in his hand. After the fireball left his hand, the Beastman shaman roared and began to condense a new one. Unfortunately, even though the berserk fire elemental energy gathered in his palm, it could not complete the shaping process. The Beastman shaman's mind was in a daze. He had somehow forgotten any incantations or hand gestures related to the elemental fireball. Damn it, it must have something to do with this fire wizard. The Beastman shaman's ferocious face revealed a sinister smile. He dispersed the fire elemental energy and began to embed his consciousness into the water totem behind him. However, the Beastman shaman was surprised to find that the elemental energy that he normally controlled seemed to be a stranger to him. It was stuck at the shaping stage. Damn it, what kind of sorcery is this? How can it interfere with other people's normal spellcasting? The Beastman shaman's consciousness was in a daze, and a huge thunderstorm began to form with him at the center. Unfortunately, the Grade 3 Thunder Dragon Arm's lightning spell had lost its effect. The field of elemental isolation could not differentiate between friend and foe. As long as it was not the fire elemental energy, it would not be affected. Thus, at this moment, Grimm was the only one who could cast spells in this field. After a few fruitless attempts, the Beastman shaman immediately understood the basic effects of the red field. It did not continue to waste its energy on the elemental totem pole. Instead, it grabbed the goat horn staff and brandished it vigorously as it charged towards Grimm. To the Beastman shaman, casting spells was only one of their methods of attacking their enemies. When it came to close combat, the Beastman Shaman was not much weaker than an ordinary orc warrior. Like the Beastman Shaman, the Grade 3 Thunder Dragon that had lost its elemental casting ability roared and charged at Grim. Even without its elemental abilities, the Thunder Dragon's physical prowess was still top-notch among high-level magical creatures. With the Grade 3 Thunder Dragon acting as a meat shield, Grim's entire body was wreathed in flames. He raised his hands high and gathered the fire elemental energy into the shape of spears, throwing them at the Beastman Shaman with all his might. After activating the flame set equipment set and transforming into the terrifying Balrog, Grim's current strength had reached 20 points. Although he was still inferior to those combatants who focused on strength, he was more than enough to act as a human catapult. Flame spears streaked through the air towards the Beastman Shaman. It could only use the goat horn staff to disperse these obstructions while fighting the Thunder Dragon. The flame spears had an attack power of 400 to 500 degrees and would explode violently upon contact. If not for the Thunder Dragon, the Beastman Shaman would have been able to deal with such attacks. But now, it could only try its best to block the attacks. As for the unstoppable flame spears, they would cause it to stagger when they hit its thick and sturdy body. Then, it would shriek in pain from the heat. Although the Beastman Shaman was tough, its size and strength were far inferior to the Thunder Dragon of the same tier. If not for the Thunder Dragon's fear of the extremely heavy goat horn staff in its hands, the battle would have already been one-sided. But now, with the fake Grade 3 Grim joking around at the side, the Beastman Shaman situation immediately plummeted, and it quickly fell into the terrifying killing formation of the two. The Crimson family members who had chosen to clear the perimeter of the battlefield were all dumbfounded. They never thought that their Grade 2 Patriarch would dare to interfere in the battle of a Grade 3 creature. And looking at the situation on the battlefield, it seemed that he had played a significant role. Chapter 822. With a pained and resentful roar, the Orc Shaman finally succumbed to Arms and Grim's pincer attack. A few shield bearers who were already prepared took heavy steps, dragging the Orc Shaman's charred body and the dying Thunder Rock back to the rear of the battlefield. Grim and Arms did not hesitate. After communicating with each other, they leapt into the air and pounced on a lone Grade 3 centaur. In another corner of the battlefield, Mary and Tigule were stealthily hunting down the Grade 2 orcs who had fallen into a tight encirclement. Since the witches had the upper hand and the main force of the orcs had been blocked in the sky, there were no powerful elites among the Grade 2 and Grade 3 powerhouses left on the battlefield. The witches were skilled in witchcraft, and they had the advantage in numbers. Hence, the tragic scenes of powerful orcs being besieged could be seen everywhere. As these orc elites were eliminated one by one, the orc army that was already on the verge of collapse finally began to crumble. War had always been this cruel. If the orcs' morale was high, even 100 of them would dare to charge at the corpse tide. But once their morale collapsed, even though the orc army still had close to 20,000 soldiers left, they still fled in panic like ducks in a flock of perilous beasts. The higher-ups of the witches had already made up their minds to take down Drywater City. How could they let the remaining orcs retreat so easily? Under the Witch of Death's command, a large number of undead swarmed in the direction of the orcs' retreat. The shadow creatures were even more elusive, constantly ambushing the retreating orc army from the side. The planar battlefield was a full 110 kilometers away from Drywater City. Previously, when the orc army received the oracle, they had abandoned most of their heavy weapons and rushed to the witch's portal. Unfortunately, after 8 hours of bloody battle, they had failed. Even if the orcs' physique was several times that of humans, they were still tired to the point where their backs were sore and their legs weak. They could barely move. After the bloody battle, many orc warriors were already paralyzed with fatigue. Even if the swarm of undead dragged them into the sea of corpses, they were powerless to resist. Along the way, they were defeated, and along the way, they threw away their helmets and armor. The orc army was defeated miserably. It was simply too horrible to look at. The orc commandos, who were trapped in a tight encirclement, suffered an even worse defeat. Although they were not inferior to the senior witches in terms of rank, In terms of real combat power, they were far from being a match for witches of the same rank. After wiping out nearly half of the orc powerhouses in one go, the several witch leaders discussed and decided that the Death Witch leader, Thuna, would continue to chase after the remaining orcs while the Dark Witch leader, Circe, would lead the Shadow Legion to take a shortcut and directly attack Drywater City. As for the Destiny Witches who were not strong enough, they simply cleaned up the battlefield with the Winter Witches and the Witches of Pain and began to move slowly towards Drywater City with the spoils of war. After all the witches were teleported away, the portals slowly closed. By the time all the orcs and witches had left the gravel wilderness, there were only scorched bones and large pools of dark bloodstains. Drywater City. It was the leader of the Stonemer tribe, Dawa, who stayed in the city to preside over the defense affairs. After receiving the Orc God's oracle, Drywater City sent out 50,000 orc elites one after another to attack the invading witches' portal. Dawa stayed in the city, mobilizing the surrounding forces while paying close attention to the battlefield in the distance. At around 3 p.m., the first batch of retreating orc troops was discovered by the Harpy patrol team that went out. In the next 2 hours, Dawa received more terrible news one after another. The orc army was defeated by the witches who came from across the plains. The witches were using the horrendous tide of corpses to drive the remnants of the orcs towards the direction of Drywater City. What made Dawa even more shocked was that in the other direction, the Wolf Cavalry Patrol Team and the Harpy sentries sent by Drywater City had all disappeared inexplicably. According to the orc military system, all the patrols and sentries were required to pass information to Drywater City every once in a while. Now, Drywater City had lost contact with several sentries outside the city. Even the team sent to investigate the situation had not returned. This was undoubtedly a bad news that couldn't be any worse. The enemy seemed to want to take advantage of the defeat of the Orc Elite Army to directly take down Drywater City. Although Dawa could see this, he was helpless. After all, Zardes? Fong took away all the elite troops of Drywater City. After realizing that the situation was bad, Dawa, the chief of the Stonemer tribe, could only issue the highest level of conscription order, mobilizing all the orcs and affiliated tribes in the city to fill the top of Drywater City. For a time, the majestic and towering city walls of Drywater City were crowded with people. Teams of Taurens with greenish-black horns on their heads pushed heavy war machines and transported them one by one to the tower in the middle of the city wall. For a time, the majestic and towering city wall of Drywater City was crowded with people. Teams of Taurens with greenish-black horns on their heads pushed heavy war machines and transported them one by one to the tower in the middle of the city wall. Perhaps it was because the orcs were too sturdy and strong that they only liked to take off their clothes and fight with the enemy in the field with big knives. It was this kind of valiance and bravery that allowed the Beastmen to become the sole rulers of the Johnson Plain. But it was also because of this fighting style that they disdained to study war machines and strategies. If they had an advantageous position on the battlefield, it would not matter. But now, when the orcs became the weaker side and needed to defend the city, this inadequacy became extremely glaring and terrifying. Therefore, when the less than 20,000 orcs retreated to the outskirts of Drywater City, the desolate and tragic scene shocked everyone who witnessed it. They could not help but swallow their saliva secretly. On the Yellow Road, less than 2 miles away from Drywater City, a team of fast-moving ghouls emerged from the tide of undead and quickly caught up with the orc army. The exhausted orcs could only choose to defend in place, resisting the attack of the undead army while desperately calling for help from the defenders of Drywater City. Witnessing this scene, a serious internal conflict immediately broke out in Drywater City. This batch of orcs was originally the troops of Drywater City, and almost every orc warrior had relatives and friends who were waiting for their return in the city. Suddenly seeing their relatives suffering from the terrifying attacks of the undead outside the city, the defenders in the city could no longer suppress the madness in their hearts. They rushed to the city gate to open the gate and rescue their relatives. There was a serious conflict between the defenders at the city gate and the agitated orcs, which also caused the morale of the defenders to waver. Although Deva, the supreme commander of the defenders in the city, saw it clearly, he also understood in his heart. If he refused to send troops to rescue these soldiers, then there would be no need for a battle, as the people in the city would collapse. But if you were to send troops to rescue them, the tide of undead that was slowly advancing near the horizon was probably waiting for this moment. In this dilemma, Deva could only sigh inwardly in order to open the city gate, sending a mixed force of 3,000 to rescue the trapped orc army. This order undoubtedly became the reason for the rapid fall of Drywater City. The main force was the Tauren army of 2,000 people. In addition, there were 300 wolf riders, 600 centaurs, and 100 eagle riders. Outside the city, they were greeted by the ghouls and vengeful spirits that the witches of death had carefully prepared. As soon as the two sides clashed, thousands of vengeful spirits swooped down from the sky, laughing sinisterly as they turned invisible and rushed into the mixed force. Vengeful spirits were special creatures formed by the combination of death, resentment, and void matter. Most of them did not have a real body and were almost immune to most physical damage. Their attacks did not have physical effects and only used their cold resentment to corrode the souls of living beings. Therefore, their attacks had an extremely strong effect of devouring souls and could effectively absorb the spiritual vitality and soul energy of the enemy. On the other hand, there were too few orcs who could use elemental powers, and normal weapons could not harm the vengeful spirits at all. Therefore, amidst the concentrated rain of arrows from the centaurs and the spears from the eagle riders, the translucent vengeful spirits withstood the attacks and rushed to the orcs' sides, stabbing their illusory claws into the orcs' bodies as if searching for something. The centaurs and taurens who were attacked by the vengeful spirits could not harm the vengeful spirits at all, no matter how they swung their spears and stakes. On the other hand, under the siege of the vengeful spirits, their soul energy was rapidly drained, and they almost lost the ability to think and fight. Their bodies stiffened and fell to the ground. With the vengeful spirits entering the fray, the mixed force of orcs was instantly thrown into chaos. At that moment, the ghouls that were following closely behind rushed in from all directions. The Tauren warriors with blood-red eyes roared angrily, using their thick and broad hooves to pound the ground loudly. They waved the wooden stakes in their hands, which were as thick as an adult's waist, and smashed the ghouls that pounced on them into a pile of blood paste. However, these ghouls were obviously not afraid of the arrival of death. Although they were far inferior to the Tauren warriors in terms of strength and physique, they were much faster than the Tauren warriors. The ghouls darted from high to low, weaving between the wooden pillars that were whistling in the wind. From time to time, they would pounce on the bodies of some Tauren warriors and claw them, or shoot out tongue arrows from their hideous mouths, leaving bloody holes on the bodies of the Tauren warriors. Chapter 823. Many orcs were lying on the city wall. They could only watch helplessly as their kin fought against the terrifying undead spirits not far from the city, yet they were unable to break free from the enemy's entanglement. This caused them to feel even more anxious and irritated. In the sky, the wraiths and the eagle-bodied men were entangled. On the ground, the taurens, centaurs, and wolf riders were fighting with the ghouls. From the situation, the orc warriors lived up to their reputation of bravery. They were smashing the ghouls into bloody paste and chopping them into pieces. However, the mixed forces that went out to rescue the orc warriors were only 400 meters away, but they could not meet up. But at this moment, a fierce battle suddenly broke out in Drywater City. Unknowingly, groups of pitch-black shadow creatures with typical exotic characteristics emerged from various dark corners of Drywater City and launched fierce attacks on all the orcs nearby. At this moment, the only ones who could stay in the city were either the women and children or the elderly orcs. Faced with such a ferocious shadow creature, they suffered a large number of casualties almost immediately. The orcs, who were worried about their juniors outside the city, immediately let out heart-wrenching roars and rushed down from the city wall, fighting with these uninvited shadow creatures. More than a dozen shadow witches did not fight these orcs head-on. Instead, They relied on their shadow concealment skills to run around the city. Every time they reached an area, they would open a small passage to the shadow plane in a corner of the wall and summon a group of shadow creatures that were only at the apprentice level. Every now and then, there would be a few tier 1 shadow creatures mixed in. It was obviously unrealistic to rely on these small fries to take down a solid city with 40,000 to 50,000 orcs. However, using them to disrupt the beastman's formation was like a fish in water, and they couldn't be more suitable. Orcs were all elemental insulators. Except for orc shamans who could control and summon some elemental power, the rest of the combat professions were mostly physical attacks. Johnson Plain was lacking in resources, and the orc warriors did not have any magic equipment at all. This made it difficult for them to quickly kill the shadow creatures in groups. The shadow creature's ability to ignore defense also hurt the orc warriors. These wounds were covered in strands of shadow power, and without the orc shaman's help, they wouldn't be able to heal. Therefore, relying on the many shadow creatures, just a dozen Grade 1 and Grade 2 shadow witches were enough to stir up chaos in Drywater City, and the people's morale was low. At this time, the Witches of Death had already driven the tide of undead across the horizon, drowning the remaining orcs and the pitiful rescue team, who were still struggling outside the city. The huge undead tide did not stop at all. Like a black tide, it hit the city walls of Drywater City. There were only 2 city gates in the east and west of Drywater City. The towering city walls were densely covered with turrets and bastions. Powerful ballistae and rapid-fire guns revealed half of their bodies from the crenellations. Each of the crossbow bolts was over 2 meters long and as thick as a child's arm. The body of the crossbow, which was forged from refined iron, emitted a cold light under the bright sunlight. As the undead tide approached, the rapid-fire arrows flew down from the top of the city walls, passing through the crowd of undead with ear-piercing whistles and nailing them into meat skewers. If the attackers were replaced by humans, they would have been scared out of their wits, and their morale would have plummeted. However, the undead controlled by the witches obviously did not have such a problem. Even in the face of the dense rain of arrows, they still screamed and pounced on the 12-meter-high city walls. The orcs' city walls were made of rough and hard boulders piled up together. There were also countless sharp wooden stakes nailed into the walls. These were originally used to guard against the nearby large-scale orc tide, but they did not expect to encounter another terrifying enemy today, the undead tide. The black tide of corpses rushed to the bottom of the city walls, clustered into lumps of flesh, and then pushed each other to climb up. The zombies moved very slowly and clumsily, but as the pile of flesh became thicker and thicker, countless wriggling, terrifying undead slowly extended towards the top of the city walls. The orcs who were lying on the top of the city walls and throwing stones down with all their might were so shocked that their faces turned green and their limbs went limp. From their point of view, they could see hideous and frightening faces, as well as ferocious undead that were fighting to be the first to reach the top. These undead did not seem to know what fear was. Even in the face of the boulders that the orcs threw at them with all their might, or the arrows that were shot at them, they still opened their bloody mouths and stretched out their filthy claws to intimidate the enemies that were right in front of them. They were not living beings, but a group of dead corpses that could move freely under the control of the power of witchcraft. And if they were to be devoured by such undead, even with the protection of the beast god, the orcs' souls would probably fall to the terrifying underworld to be trampled on. It was because of this understanding that these devout believers of the beast god felt a trace of fear for the first time and had a strong urge to escape from this place. However, the orcs' blood and unyielding spirit offset the fear in their hearts, causing them to attack the undead below the city walls with waves of roars and roars. Arrows were shot out, and kerosene was splashed everywhere. Following the release of a fire arrow, a huge ball of flames suddenly exploded below the city walls. The entire battlefield was immediately filled with the pungent smell of roasted corpses, and it made people want to vomit. Grim, who was watching the battle from afar, could not help but shake his head and sigh. Although the undead army was just cannon fodder concocted by the Witches of Death, they could not be so easily squandered. The planar wars were endless, and if they wanted to conquer any mature plane, they had to be prepared for a long war. Now that the planar gate was closed, the Witches of Death could only bring so many undead into the Johnson plane. If they were used up in the early stages, how are they going to stop the real army of the Orc Empire in the later stages? It seemed like they needed to suppress the undead army for a while. Under Grimm's instructions, the cloned brain Jellu once again led the magic archers towards the city walls. When they reached a suitable position, Jellu stopped and began to order the magic archers to fire at the top of the city walls in a frenzy, suppressing the defense of the city walls. 300 magic archers equipped with magic ray guns stood their ground, and the ray guns in their hands shot out dazzling rays of red light. Each shot was enough to cover an area of 50 to 60 meters above the city walls. The orcs who were shielded by the battlements were fine, and they dodged the fierce attack. However, the orcs who stuck their bodies out to throw boulders at the city walls were unlucky. Their bodies were pierced with numerous bloody holes, and they screamed in pain as they fell from the city walls. The orcs were brave and fearless. The orcs were the strongest and bravest warriors in the entire Johnson Plain. However, this still could not make up for the huge difference in equipment between the two sides. The orcs' equipment was all sourced from the desolate northwest wastelands. There were no large metal mines there, nor were there skilled blacksmiths who could forge high-quality weapons and armor. Therefore, it was rare to see orc warriors with high-quality full-body armor. The only things they had were thin beast skins and sturdy bodies. The orcs might be strong, but their bodies were still made of flesh and blood. In the face of the overwhelming scorching rays, they could only try their best to dodge and wail in pain. They could not bring out any equipment that could defend against them. Hiding in a sturdy fort, Dawa, who was watching the battlefield, punched a coarse rock. Wherever his fist landed, the rock crumbled, and a deep pit filled with spiderweb cracks appeared. Where did these damned witches find so many metal puppets? No, I can't let the warriors on the city walls defend against the enemy's concentrated attacks. Go, inform the Cyclopes. It's time for them to take the field. A messenger immediately ran out. A moment later, somewhere below the city, a group of 12 or 13 Cyclopes, led by a Cyclops king, slowly ascended the city wall. Their appearance immediately attracted the attention of the witches below the city walls. A cyclope that could throw stones? It seemed that they were the orcs' only long-range troops. Seeing the Cyclopes appear, Grimm could not help but feel a little nervous. These 300 magic archers were his main force in the planar war. If they were destroyed by these grade 2 Cyclopes, Grimm would probably die of heartache. Grimm gritted his teeth and forced a smile. He raised his hand and threw out 2 magic puppet crystal cores, summoning 2 terrifying 5-meter-tall flame demons. With a furious roar, he transformed into a tall Balrog that was wreathed in flames. 3 flame demons appeared in one go, causing the gazes of the people around the battlefield to focus on Grimm. Under Grimm's lead, the 2 terrifying flame demons arrived at the front of the magic archers, one on the left and one on the right. Facing the distant Drywater City, they began to summon a large-scale crimson flame pillar, meteor shower, and volcano of doom. Although the threat of a grade 2 spell against a grade 3 creature was limited, it was no less terrifying than an apocalypse for the low and mid-tier orcs. Fiery meteors rained down from the sky, creating fiery shock waves as they collided with each other. The damage done to the distant city walls was simply staggering. Pillars of crimson flame pillar with a diameter of 10 meters suddenly exploded at a certain spot on the city walls, engulfing 20 to 30 orc warriors at a time. The Tier 1 orc warriors didn't even have time to cry out for help before they were incinerated by the towering pillars of fire. Only the Type 2 beastmen were able to rely on their powerful physiques to rush out of the inferno. Their bodies were char-black. Moreover, the magic flames did not disappear easily. Instead, they stuck to the stones and continued to burn, even igniting the wooden weapons on the city walls. Chapter 824. In terms of battle prowess alone, Grimm's existence could not be seen on the battlefield today. However, the fire shaman was recognized as a battlefield sweeper in the sorcerer world. Once he was allowed to unleash his power without restraint, the damage they could cause to the enemy far exceeded that of high-grade sorcerers. Now, the 3 5-meter-tall flame demons were standing side by side, using their terrifying fire spells to rapidly overturn the battlefield one after another. Almost in an instant, the 500-meter-tall wall of Drywater City was engulfed in a sea of fire. The flames raged, and the sea of fire burned. All the orcs who were caught in the sea of fire either collapsed in pain or turned into flaming people that fled in all directions. Their only fate was to be burnt to ashes. The miserable scene immediately made it difficult for the Beastmen experts to sit still. Asterisk whoosh whoosh whoosh. Asterisk 5 or 6 2-meter square boulders came crashing down from the top of the wall. They were aimed at the 3 terrifying flame demons. Grimm and the 2 terrifying flame demons did not hesitate to turn their cannons around. They first used a series of lava fireballs to blow up the boulders in the air, before using even more ferocious cannon fire to cover the area where the boulders had flown up. Asterisk roar. Asterisk the strange roars of giant creatures rang out from the top of the wall. The few cyclopes were also caught in the sea of fire and could only scream in pain as they struggled to escape. Relying on their strong physique, they managed to escape to a safe place even though they were badly burned. It was a pity that the turrets and bastions on the wall were too short and could not accommodate the huge bodies of the cyclopes. Otherwise, it would not have been so easy for Grimm to burn them down. The Cyclops King was a Grade 3 existence, so how could it fear a mere Grade 2 fire shaman from another world? It let out a roar that shook the entire battlefield, and the single eye in the middle of its head shot out a yellow ray of light. It condensed an even larger boulder in its hands and threw it at Grimm with all its might. With its Grade 3 divine strength, the boulder whistled through the air, and due to its excessive speed, it even ignited a blazing flame due to the friction with the air. What was originally a simple boulder now actually had a trace of the strange smell of a fiery meteor. The blue light hidden deep in Grimm's burning eye started to issue an ear-piercing warning to him. The enemy's attacks were off the charts, and they couldn't rely on fire spells to block them. Grimm roared dodge, and he and the 2 terrifying flame demons had already leapt out. Under Jellu's command, the archers behind Grimm immediately dispersed to both sides. With a loud bang, the meteor struck the spot where Grimm had been standing. It rolled all the way and left a deep scar on the ground. The 2 magic archers at the back of the formation could not dodge in time and were hit by the meteors. Their metal bodies immediately exploded into countless metal parts and fragments. With a loud bang, the boulder wrapped in flames once again burst into a large expanse of scattered flaming stones when it reached its end. The huge space within a radius of 30 meters was engulfed in a scorching sea of fire. Grimton came out from another area and looked back at the attack of the Cyclops King. His heart couldn't help but tremble slightly. After all, a Grade 3 creature was a Grade 3 creature. The opponent clearly only had the Earth elemental ability, but he used brute force to create the power of earth and fire. Moreover, the attack power was astounding. If he had not dodged just now, Grimm's flame demon body would have been smashed by this attack, and he would have wiped out 20 to 30 magic archers behind him. Just as Grimm was about to retreat, the leader of the Witches of Death, Thuna, rode the zombie dragon and arrived behind him. Wizard, let your subordinates continue to attack the city walls. We will be responsible for dealing with the enemy's attacks. With Thuna's guarantee, Grimm was relieved. He regrouped the magic archers and fired wildly at the walls of Drywater City. Apart from Grimm, even the Winter Witches had formed a battle team and were wreaking havoc on the defenders on the city walls with violent ice spells. Such a combination of ice and fire immediately caused the defenders of Drywater City to fall into a world of ice and fire. On one side, there was a raging sea of fire, and on the other side, Ice blades and snow swords fell like rain. It was difficult for the orcs to stand on the city walls. With the cleansing of the long-range troops, the orcs who were in full swing just now immediately stopped fighting. The orcs only cared about dodging the terrifying spells and could no longer care about the undead tide that had climbed up the city walls. Grim immediately extended his cannons to the depth of the city walls, blocking the orcs in the corner towers and bastions. The undead tide that had climbed up the city walls quickly spread out along the city walls and fought with the orcs who were rushing up. Seemingly aware of the huge destructive power that the elemental wizards brought to the battlefield, the orcs immediately sent out some powerful wizards to secretly eliminate Grim. Unfortunately, they had encountered the most powerful wizard on the witch's side. How powerful was the Witch of Death, Thuna? Grim did not know this before, but after today's battle, he completely understood. Although she was just a witch, when it came to fighting style, her valiance and bravery made most of the wizards feel ashamed of themselves. A Grade 4 Orc Sword Saint and a Grade 4 Centaur had joined forces to attack, but they were actually beaten by Thuna. In the end, one of them died and the other was seriously injured. Such powerful strength was simply beyond Grimm's imagination. With the fall of the city walls and the death of the orc powerhouses, a huge gap was finally broken in the Witherwater city that had been turned upside down by the shadow creatures. The undead tide surged into the city and began to slaughter the orcs unscrupulously. Seeing that the situation was not good, the orc powerhouses had already covered some of their tribesmen and escaped through another gate into the open wilderness. However, there were still nearly 30,000 orcs trapped in Witherwater City, becoming pigs and sheep waiting to be slaughtered with nowhere to escape. After nightfall, Witherwater City had completely changed owners and became an isolated city under the rule of the Northern Witches. The restless orcs were completely cleaned up and became witchcraft materials for the Witches of Death to create new undead spirits. Under the oppression of the powerful witches, the remaining orcs became the most miserable and pitiful captives. They were forced to work as laborers and began to carry out large-scale environmental transformation inside Witherwater City. The sea of fire at the top of the city walls had been extinguished, and the undead tide had occupied the city walls, acting as loyal eyes and sentries. Various witch factions had already entered Witherwater City and began to search for legendary spoils of war unscrupulously. It had to be said that the Johnson Plain was really a poor and pitiful plain that made people sigh. The orcs were all soldiers and rarely engaged in hunting or farming. Most of these lowly jobs were taken up by the servants. This also meant that the orcs were a terrifying war race that did not produce and relied on brute force to enslave and rule the Johnson Plain. Unfortunately, they had kicked an iron plate this time. They had encountered the more powerful, more orderly, and more developed northern witches. Those who could cross the planar gate and appear in the Johnson Bit Wall were the elites carefully selected from the northern witches. Such a powerful force collided head-on with the small Witherwater City. Of course, the orcs would be smashed to pieces. This also showed the power of the northern witches from another aspect. Night fell and the cold wind howled. The night in the suburbs of Witherwater City was particularly cold and bitter. The Destiny Witches, led by Alice, were assigned to the northwest corner of Witherwater City. This used to be the mansion of an orc powerhouse, but now it had become a temporary residence for the Witches of Fate. The orcs' buildings were generally made of rough limestone stones. They looked tall and magnificent, but upon closer inspection, they were full of rugged simplicity. Besides, the orcs generally regarded strength as beauty and were proud of their rudeness. They did not understand beauty and taste like humans and elves. Therefore, there was no beauty to speak of in their buildings, nor was there any comfort to speak of in the mansion of a Grade 4 Beastman powerhouse. Other than some simple wooden tables and chairs, as well as some old furniture, there was not a single luxurious item to be seen, nor was there a single exquisite item to be seen. However, there were a lot of orc servants in the mansion, and there were many races. It was a dazzling sight. For example, the Rabbit Clan's housekeeper that acted as an accountant The porcupine clan that acted as kitchen maids, the rabbit girls, fox girls, and snake girls that acted as maids. These servants weren't brave and warlike like the orcs, but a group of cautious and pitiful worms. Therefore, when the tide of undead rushed into the city, they did not know how to resist at all, other than closing the door and hiding in their beds, shivering. When the witches killed the strong orc in front of them, they did not hesitate to surrender. Therefore, as soon as Grim and his men stepped through the gate of the orc mansion, the corridor on both sides of the door was already filled with trembling figures kneeling on the ground. At this moment, the orcs who dared to resist the witches in the city had been slaughtered. The reason why the witches kept these servants was so that they could take care of their food and daily needs. After all, the tide of undead was only suitable as cannon fodder on the battlefield. It was simply too much to ask them to cook and boil water. Grim had already returned to his human form. His black pupils scanned the crowd, but he did not find anything out of the ordinary. He then turned to his men and said, "It's been a long day. Let's take a simple rest here. Anyone who is interested in them can take them away." After that, Grim hurried into the mansion. He did not have time to eat, drink, or wash up. He quickly ordered his men to clean up a secret room, and then carried the corpse of the grade 3 orc shaman that Arms had killed himself into it. He was now extremely interested in the mage weds and totems on the orc shaman's body. Chapter 825. Seeing that Grim had left, the Scarlet Sorcerers immediately became lively. It was rare for them to come to another plane, and they had just won a huge victory. Every one of them was filled with joy and energy, and they could not help but want to vent. Their gazes swept across the courtyard full of otherworld slaves, and involuntarily fell on the dainty and beautiful servant girls. Humph, that damned orc really knows how to enjoy himself. More than one sorcerer had the same thought. Each of these maidservants was as beautiful as a flower and as charming as jade. From this, it could be seen why their previous masters had chosen them as maidservants. To be honest, the existence of these servants was an eye-opener for the Scarlet Sorcerers. They did not expect the green-skinned orcs to be so rough, and their faces were so ugly that no one could look at them directly. However, these servant girls who were also orcs were completely different from the others. They had a thick, exotic charm that could stir one's soul. The rabbit girls all had a pair of snow-white, furry ears that hung behind their heads, making them look especially cute. Their faces were delicate and fair, and there were 2 shallow dimples at the corners of their mouths. When they forced a smile, they revealed a row of pearly white teeth, which was very pleasing to the eye. The Vixen were from the Fox clan. They had oval faces, slender waists, and a long, fiery red tail behind them. They swayed as they walked, giving them a unique charm. However, the strangest ones were the snake girls. Their upper bodies were female, and their lower bodies were that of a snake. They were all very beautiful, especially that pair of strange jade-colored eyes and the full hemisphere on his chest that was covered in dense snake scales. They were even more striking and soul-stirring. The 4 Scarlet Sorcerers who came with the team were newcomers who had surrendered after losing the family war. Naturally, they did not dare to compete with Mary and the other core sorcerers for the spoils of war. Therefore, they could only stand aside and wait for Mary and the others to choose first. Mary had used all her strength in today's battle, and she had also sucked the blood of her enemies. As a result, she was extremely tired at this moment. She waved her hand at everyone in boredom and found a secret room to rest. Despite being a grade 3 Thunder Dragon, Arm still found it hard to change his nature as a dragon. He chose 3 bunny girls, 4 fox girls, and 1 snake girl in one go before he left the hall with the rest of them following behind him. As a green-skinned gnome, with his aesthetic tastes, it was naturally impossible for him to develop any interest in these ugly foreign females. Therefore, it voluntarily gave up and found a place to rest. The remaining wind wizard, Desera, had been licking his lips, his fingers twitching. However, considering his image in Medusa's eyes, he could only reluctantly give up the choice. Medusa didn't seem to care about Desira's flattery at all. Instead, her eyes were fixed on the snake women of similar size. To everyone's surprise, Dana waved her hand and took the remaining 5 snake girls away. The 4 new wizards couldn't help but feel disappointed. After a simple discussion, the 4 new wizards each took their favorite maids. For a moment, the entire mansion was filled with the sound of cannons. The soft and gentle voices of the maids could be heard everywhere. In a brightly lit secret room, the grade 3 orc shaman's corpse was placed on a sturdy wooden table. The soft animal skin robe on its body had already been taken off, revealing its lean and strong body, as well as the strange indigo magic patterns that densely covered its body. Grim stretched out his hand and lightly pressed on the shaman's chest. It didn't feel like normal flesh. Instead, it felt like leather armor that had been tanned many times, tough and dense. This was actually an innate ability of the orc's tough skin. This tough skin, after being tempered and sharpened, could withstand the stabs and slashes of sharp weapons. With this, even if the orc was naked, it was equivalent to wearing a thick leather armor. In battle, it could reduce the damage from sharp weapons by 60% and blunt weapons by 20%. No matter what, this was a good ability of the race. Grim's nimble fingers moved slowly on the orc shaman's body. With a meticulous scanning of the AI chip and his all-encompassing spiritual force, the bones, tendons, organs, and hidden acupoints of the orc shaman were revealed to Grim without reservation. As expected of a orc, beneath its tough skin was a layer of firm and dense muscles. From the AI chip's feedback, it could be seen that the sturdiness and tenacity of an orc's muscles were 10 times that of an elf's and 100 times that of a human's. From this point alone, one could already imagine how destructive an orc warrior could be when he fought with all his might. Beneath the strands of muscles that resembled steel wires were thick bones that were wrapped tightly. These bones were thick and uniform, and their surfaces were wrapped with abnormally thick veins and tendons. This allowed them to evenly distribute the force they endured to the entire body, reducing the damage and heavy pressure on the bones themselves. As for the orc shaman's organs, they were different from those of humans in the Magus world. They looked similar, but if one were to analyze them carefully, one would realize that the orcs of the Johnson Plain were completely different from the ones Grim had seen in other planes. They were 2 completely different races. In order not to destroy the magic patterns on the orc shaman's body, Grim did not dissect it directly. Instead, he used the AI chip scanning abilities to scan it. Beside the orc shaman were a few strange totem poles that he had picked up from the battlefield. Although the totem poles had lost their elemental activity following the orc shaman's death, Grim could still sense traces of a mysterious force on them. The power of divine spells. Although the force was abnormally weak and cryptic, Grim, who had experienced many battles in the Faron Plain, could recognize the source of magic at a glance. This was the power of divine spells. Orc shamans were the followers of the orc god Ash in the human world. The power they possessed was not obtained through hard work and cultivation, but through pious prayers and constant pleasing to the gods. They obtained it from the beast god ***. These orc shamans did not actually know how to gather and release elemental energy. They had prayed to the orc god and received the blessing of divine spells from Ash. In fact, every elemental attack that the orc shaman released on the battlefield came from Ash's belief system. This explained why the orc shaman had so easily lost its ability to cast elemental spells after Grim's Inferno domain engulfed it. The main reason was not because Grim had interfered with the gathering of elemental particles, but because he had interfered with the orc god's belief in the depths of the orc shaman's soul. To the orc shaman, losing the comfort and protection of the orc god's divine force was the main reason for its eventual defeat. Chip, have the 2 magic patterns been scanned? Beep. The 2 3-dimensional mage weds have been stored in the database. Comparing and analyzing the similarities and differences between them, it is estimated that we will get a basic conclusion in 23 hours, 48 minutes, and 14 seconds, needed 23 hours. Grim could not help but yawn, finally feeling mentally exhausted. He had participated from start to finish in today's blood battle. Especially during the siege, he had turned into the fiercest and fiercest cannon, turning most of the city into a sea of fire. This had undoubtedly consumed a lot of his spiritual force. Now that he had relaxed, Grim felt extremely tired. As the leader of the Crimson Tribe, Grim did not immediately rest. Instead, he called out to Jellu, who was wandering around the Orc mansion. Jellu was a strange creature and did not need to personally participate in the battle, so there was no possibility of him running out of stamina or spiritual force. Hence, under his command and arrangements, all the magic equipment surrounded the Orc mansion and guarded it tightly. After completing all this, Grim chose a place in the secret room and fell asleep. Pompeii City. As the capital of the Orc Empire in the Johnson Plain, Pompeii City was a majestic holy city in the hearts of all the Orcs. Especially in the most central location of the city, there was a majestic beast god shrine towering high up. But at this moment, in the largest hall of the temple, countless beastman shamans were angrily roaring and arguing with each other. This is the oracle of the Orc god. The enemy is a terrifying witch who has come with the intention of destroying the Johnson Plain. We cannot let them gain a foothold here. A rank 4 shaman roared frantically. We already know what you're saying, but Drywater City has already failed, and we've lost almost 110,000 orcs. An old orc wearing a purple gold crown argued worriedly. This sacrifice is nothing. As long as you repel the invaders, Lord Beast God will reward you handsomely. At that time, your family and clansmen will forever receive Lord Beast God's blessing. The other tier 4 shaman consoled, sure foam loudly from the side. Under the threats and promises of the high-ranked shamans, the old orc could only helplessly sign his name on the parchment and stamp his copper seal. With this parchment, the orc shamans could mobilize all their forces in the name of the Orc Empire to fight to the death against those hateful witches. Chapter 826. Grim was woken up by a series of notifications from the AI chip. Slowly exiting from his deep meditation, Grim was immediately drowned in a series of notifications. Beep. Unknown energy resonance system detected. Data incomplete. Beep. Strange spirit embedding method detected. Collecting data. Beep. Discovered otherworldly energy amplification spell formation. Model recorded. Beep. Discovered otherworldly life amplification spell formation. Model recorded. Beep. Discovered otherworldly energy accumulation system. Model recorded. A series of notifications flooded Grim's mind, causing him, who had just woken up from his meditation, to be at a loss as to where he was. After spending a long time, Grim barely managed to scan through all the notifications. Most of them were strange spell formations that the AI chip had found and extracted from the totem poles and the orc shaman's magic patterns. Though these spell formations were different from the ones in the Magus world, they had similar effects. Studying them thoroughly would definitely be of great help to Grim's current knowledge of Mageweths. Grim's main body was still too weak. In battles with powerful enemies, the increase in strength from his second transformation was the basis for him to defeat many powerful enemies. If his knowledge of magic patterns could be improved, he would be able to improve on the Balrog transformation magic patterns. This would undoubtedly be of great help to him in future battles. That was why Grim was so interested in the tattoos on the Beastman shamans. Of course, it was wishful thinking to try and figure out the magic source of the tattooed Mageweth just by observing it with the naked eye and simply copying it. However, by comparing the tattooed Mageweths with the Mageweths of 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 the mage-weds, 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 of the mage in different planes. Mage-weds developed according to different energy systems. Naturally, they all had their own similarities and differences. However, the most basic content of the magic patterns could still be traced. Mage-weds in the Magus world were more of a three-dimensional spell formation. They ingeniously used the magic runes hidden in the spell formation to resonate with the elemental particles in the surrounding void, which then converged into a terrifying force that could change the material world. Hence, in the Magus world, mastering more high-ranked runes and variant runes was the only way to increase one's attainment in the study of magic prints. However, in the Johnson plane, Mage-weds still retained the chaotic and primitive rune system of the ancient magi. Of course, after the transformation and mutation of the beast god, these simple mage-weds also had the strange function of communicating with the gods, establishing a channel of faith and transmitting divine energy. Orc shamans actually used the divine spell seeds bestowed by the beast god, combined with their own life energy system, to stimulate elemental spells and all kinds of magical extraordinary abilities. However, compared to wizards, orc shamans may have a certain advantage in terms of physique and strength, but they were far behind in the most important aspect of spellcasters, which was spirit. Orc shamans and wizards of the same rank would have 10 to 15 points of will, which made it difficult for them to cast powerful spells. Moreover, they would be consumed too quickly in battle. In order to circumvent the awkward reality of the orc shaman's poor elemental talents, the beast god, Asterisk, gave them a strange spirit attachment technique. They could divide a part of their soul and deposit it on the totem poles that were full of magic prints, and then use the totem poles to replace themselves as an additional source of energy. With the totem poles, the orc shamans did not have to worry about the lack of elemental energy during battle. Moreover, with the help of the totem poles, any orc shaman could immediately become a four-element spellcaster. This also gave them more choices and a more reasonable combination of spells in a battle of spells. However, there were advantages and disadvantages. In this way, these so-called orc shamans completely became the followers of the beast god. Their power came from the great beast god, Astar. Once their actions angered Asterisk, the beast god would send down divine punishment to cut off the channel to obtain the divine spell seeds, and they would immediately turn from the high and mighty orc shamans into lowly orcs with nothing. This kind of unearned power was like a terrible drug addiction. Once infected, there was no way to get rid of it. No orc shaman could endure the emptiness of losing their power, and even more so, they could not bear the rapid decline of their social status. Therefore, in order to keep their status and power, they could only crawl at the feet of the great beast god, Asterisk, and dedicate everything to him. Unlike the development of civilization in other worlds, most of the planes affected by the faith of the gods were in a state of stagnation and extinction of technology. An overly developed and prosperous life could easily lure believers into depravity, making them addicted to the progress and development of science and technology, thus weakening their worship and belief in the great God. Therefore, most of the planes ruled by the faith of the gods would stagnate in a primitive and simple social form for a long time. Devout believers of the gods lived in a simple and ordinary society day and night, and there were still fierce conflicts and serious social problems between the various classes. Affected by the hardships of life and the lack of resources, their lives were difficult and arduous. Only by putting in 10 or even 100 times the effort could they barely fill their stomachs and live in poverty and hardship. However, it was precisely because of the existence of so many hardships that the aristocratic class, who were favored by the gods and lived a good life, became the object of eternal jealousy and envy. And the only way for the lowly people at the bottom to become superior and live a life of debauchery was to try their best to please the beast god Astar. Therefore, the more suffering and disasters the gods bestowed on the plains, the more believers they would be able to attract, and the purer the level of belief of the core believers. This undoubtedly became the standard ruling process of the gods after they occupied a plane, just like the Johnson plane in front of them. It had been completely ruled by the beast god, asterisk 4 tens of thousands of years. However, their current social form was still a relatively primitive and crude clan tribal system. Although they had built a powerful orc empire and possessed the power to defeat any foreign race in the plane. It was a pity that their civilization and their social system were like a bug trapped in amber, forever locked and solidified at a certain stage by the high and mighty gods. In the Johnson Plain, countless foreign races wanted to rise again, but they were all defeated by the powerful force of the Orc Empire. And the Orc Empire, which had 7 million powerful citizens, became the largest slave owner of the other foreign races. They did not produce, sat on the best land, enjoyed the best resources, and captured beautiful women from various races for their own sexual pleasure. It was under their oppression that the primitive and ignorant social form of the Johnson Plain was able to continue for thousands of years. Otherwise, if a weak race like the gnomes could develop to such a scale and level of civilization, how could the social form of the Johnson Plain still be so primitive and simple? Sometimes it was really difficult to say whether the gods were a blessing or a curse to a plane. It was precisely because they clearly understood the gods' foolish ways that the wizards, who claimed to be the embodiment of wisdom and the inheritors of knowledge, did not have a harmonious relationship with the gods. In order to maintain the purity of the faith in the plane, the gods absolutely forbade wizards from entering and spreading evil knowledge, and it was impossible for wizards to be born naturally in the primordial land of chaos. Hence, in essence, the gods and magi were natural opposites. Both sides almost fought to the death as soon as they met, as if they were irreconcilable enemies. According to the information Grimm received from Alice, the leader of the Witches of Death, Thuna, had called for the northern witches to invade the Johnson Plain. On the surface, it was because one of her subordinates' secondary planes had been destroyed by the Orc god. But in reality, it was the conflict between the great witches who had gone to the void and the Orc god. The two sides would destroy one plane, and the other would assassinate a few important high-level figures of the other side. As the two sides fought back and forth, hundreds and thousands of plane worlds were involved in the conflict between the two factions. Thuna had actually responded to the call of the great witches from the outer realms and issued the declaration of war. Otherwise, most of her main territories were located in the sorcerer world, so how could she have any relations with the Orc god that was billions of kilometers away? When Thuna led the northern witches into the Johnson Plain, the great witches from the outer realms were also intercepting the reinforcements of the Orc god along the way. Otherwise, the northern witches had been in the Johnson Plain for more than 30 hours, and the gods of the Orc god still hadn't sent their avatars or incarnations to expel them. However, the blockade of the great witches from the outer realms was not invulnerable. If the war dragged on for too long, the gods of the Orc god would find a way to send their avatars into the Johnson Plain, and the northern witches would have a hard time fighting. After all, although the avatars of the gods were also grade 4, the knowledge and combat skills they had mastered were obviously superior to the grade 4 witches trapped in the plane. So, fighting with the avatars of the Orc god of the same grade, even the most powerful Thuna would be anxious and unable to sleep peacefully. Therefore, on the third day of occupying Drywater City, Thuna gathered all the witch factions and mobilized the elite troops to destroy the Orc god's temple that the Orc Empire had placed in various parts of the plain. Chapter 8:27. This was actually the inevitable process of invading the plains of gods. The first step was, of course, to find a way to send people to infiltrate the interior of the plane that needed to be invaded through space cracks and other means. Although this step was somewhat risky, as long as they adapted to the situation, the success rate was still quite high. That was because every plane of existence was different. The advanced personnel had to be strong enough to protect themselves or have the ability to integrate into the native society. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to find a suitable teleportation point in an unfamiliar plane of existence. This time, When the Northern Witches invaded Johnson Plain, the advanced troops sent with a joint team of the Deceit Witches and the Witch of Death. After the transmission point was determined, the second step was naturally to coordinate from the inside and the outside and find a way to open a portal to send the invading troops into the plane. This step was undoubtedly the most risky. Previously, when the advanced troops invaded the enemy plane, they relied on the space cracks or similar channels that naturally existed inside the plane. Such a channel was not only narrow, but also full of danger. It could not accommodate those powerful creatures at all, so it could only accommodate some small rats crawling in and out. Almost every plane world would have several similar incidents of plane invasion every year. Most of them were unlucky people who mistakenly entered the space turbulence and were swept in. Of course, there were also some plane travelers who traveled around. Such people could come in, but if they were weaker, they might be swallowed by the native monsters before they could even walk out of the wilderness. Those who were stronger might stir up trouble and quickly rise in a certain area. But once such people revealed their identity, they would inevitably face the native creatures that occupied the position of the plane's ruler. Therefore, entering and exiting through the plane cracks might not attract the attention of the gods. But once they wanted to open a stable transmission door inside the plane to a foreign world, the strange space ripples would not be able to hide from the powerful gods who controlled the laws of the plane world. Therefore, after the invading troops passed through the transmission door, the first thing they had to face was the tide of native creatures from the plane. And the tragic degree of the plane war was also proportional to the size of the native forces of the plane. For example, the invasion organized by the Witch of Death, Thuna, was very successful. Only when the plane transmission door was completely formed did the beast god Ash hurriedly send down an oracle and recruit the nearby orc believers to intercept and kill them. Unfortunately, Drywater City was not a big city in the Orc Empire. The strength and elite level of the believers here were limited, which was why they were defeated by the witches who came across the plains. Not only were the elite troops lost, but even Drywater City had fallen into the hands of the witches. After stabilizing Drywater City, the witches couldn't help but want to push the planar war to the third stage. That was to attack from all directions and destroy the foundation of faith of the Orc Empire. The witches would send out hundreds of undead squads, which would scatter across the vast territory of the Orc Empire. They would randomly invade and kill orcs and attack small villages. On the other hand, the witches would have to personally deal with the orc towns that had grown to a certain scale. They would either send plagues or burn them down. In short, they would not give the orcs any chance to breathe. As for the Destiny Witches led by Alice, they were assigned to 3 orc cities. They were all small cities with a population of 30,000 to 50,000. They were all on a nearby march route and were suitable for the witches to wipe out in one fell swoop. Not only the Destiny Witches, but the 7 Witches factions were also given similar compulsory missions to annihilate the orcs and destroy the Orc Temple. In comparison, the Destiny Witch's mission was relatively easy. For example, the Witch of Death, as the initiator of the planar war, naturally took on a larger and more difficult mission. A powerful undead expeditionary force, led by a Grade 4 Witch of Death, was preparing to go on an expedition to the Orc Empire's Pompeii City. They would strive to tie the main forces of the Orc Empire near the capital so that they could not interfere with the witches' arrangements in Drywater City. The purpose of this planar invasion was not to occupy, but to destroy. Therefore, the witches would arrange an extremely grand blood sacrifice ceremony in Drywater City. They would use a special method to corrupt and erode the plane source of Johnson World. This process would undoubtedly consume a shocking amount of indigenous materials, which also required the witches to send troops to search for and capture the indigenous orcs. Therefore, Grimm and the others only stayed in Drywater City for a short 2 days before they once again packed their bags and embarked on their journey to the mission location. 389 metal magic machinery, 30 magic chariots, full of a large amount of resources, escorted by 200 eyeball aircrafts, majestically drove into the distance. The goblin engineers and technicians who followed the team also became chariot operators and magic machinery repairmen. The existence of the split brain Gru also gave this team the ability to fight continuously. Outside of Drywater City, what appeared in front of them was the endless great wasteland. It was desolate, lonely, and luxuriant with withered grass. Standing on the only yellow official road in the great wasteland, looking around, it was surrounded by weeds that were half the height of a person, blocking most of their vision. And the official road meandered through the weeds, continuously extending into the distance. Almost all of the orcs were brute people with muscles for brains. Naturally, they would not understand how important convenient transportation was to a ruling race with a huge territory. Although there were many wise people among the vassal races, they were lowly and could not convince the orc rulers to spend a large amount of energy, time, and resources to repair and maintain the important roads in their territory. Therefore, the only road in front of Grimm and the others was a yellow road full of potholes, weeds, and moss. The 6-ton magic-powered chariot rumbled as it rolled across the center of the yellow dirt road, leaving 2 deep ruts on the solid road. The metal magic machinery put away all of their weapons and marched in a marching manner on both sides of the chariots. The watchtower at the top of the chariots was opened, revealing a goblin head wearing leather helmets and goggles. Hanging on their necks were double bucket telescopes, which they raised from time to look at both sides of the road. However, the weeds here were too tall and too dense. Even if there was a group of orcs lying on the side of the road, the goblin lookouts would not be able to detect them in advance. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk a strong gust of wind blew. An eyeball fighter the size of a human head swept past the weeds not far away. The violent airflow it ejected caused the weeds beneath it to scatter in all directions. Suddenly, it seemed to have discovered something. It swooped down from the sky and hovered 3 meters above the weeds. Then, a dazzling ray of heat shot into the weeds. After a while, the eyeball dived into the weeds. When it rose into the air again, it stretched out a small mechanical arm and grabbed a hairy yellow hair. There was a bloody hole in the top of the hare's head. It could not be more dead. The goblin lookouts on the caravan cheered softly. They could eat fresh rabbit meat for lunch today. Although there were many of them, they were still able to reach an astonishing speed of 40 kilometers per hour. They passed through many areas along the way and could see thick black smoke rising in the distance. Every black smoke represented an orc village that had been baptized by the undead army. Those orc civilians who were involved in the Planar War were either killed by the undead and became one of them, or they were brought to Drywater City to become one of the sacrifices for the future blood sacrifice ceremony. No matter which one it was, it meant the end of life and the destruction of their homes for these orc civilians. In this terrible world where the strong dominated everything, equality, justice, and rights were too extravagant a topic. The magic machinery troops ran at high speed. Occasionally, they would meet other teams of witches who were going in the same direction. The other party was either riding on a large beast or driving a wizard beast. They were also racing against time to rush to the distant mission site. When the two parties met, they simply greeted each other and went their separate ways. Looking at the long line of carriages flying under the banner of the Destiny Witches, stirring up a cloud of dust as they sped past them, and then looking at their neat and strict formation and their strange and sophisticated equipment, the eyes of the witches who were still slowly wriggling in place turned red with envy. If the attendants and wizard beasts were not taken into account, with the witches' flying speed, it would not be a problem for them to travel thousands of miles in a day and a night. However, this was a foreign world, not the safe and secure sorcerer world. Therefore, the guards and wizard beasts that protected their safety could not be abandoned at will. This also severely limited the witches' mobility. Those high-grade witches might dare to move freely. When they encountered enemies, they would fight if they could, and if they couldn't, they could retreat safely. However, most of the rank 1 witches in their camp did not have such courage and ability. Once they encountered a strong orc, without the protection of a large group of wizard beasts, their survival and combat ability were not optimistic. They were here to conquer and destroy this world, not to die. Therefore, they would rather be slower than risk their lives to carry out the mission in a place where strong orcs were active. However, the ride of the Destiny Witches obviously had both safety and speed, which made them even more jealous and envious. All of the witches knew this in their hearts. One of the main reasons why they were able to live so leisurely was because they had caught the Orc Empire off guard. After the annihilation of the Orc army in Drywater City, there was no larger Orc city or combat force within 1,000 miles. If the Orc Empire wanted to annihilate this witch army, they could only spend a lot of effort to mobilize a more powerful army from afar. With the backward and broken road system in Johnson Plain, it would be difficult to achieve this without 10 days to half a month. Therefore, the earlier the witch faction completed the compulsory mission, the higher the safety. Chapter 828. Along the way, Grimm and the others had witnessed the bravery of the Beastmen race. Regardless of whether it was the Orc Wolf Riders that had formed into an army and were charging over while howling like wild beasts, or the Orc warriors that were alone and wanted to ambush the witches who were left behind, none of their movements could escape the eyeball fighter aircrafts that were high up in the sky. If it was just a lone orc, the scorching rays from the sky would be enough to turn them into candied haws. If there were too many orcs attacking, the eyeball fighter jets would warn them, and a magic machine caravan would quickly spread out and fire their terrifying magic cannons. Many magic archers surrounded the caravan on both sides, firing at the orcs with concentrated rays. The wolf cavalry were indeed valiant. Riding on their ferocious wolves, they charged left and right amidst the barrage of cannons that filled the sky. Howling loudly, they brandished the shiny blades in their hands. The orc warriors were bare-chested, holding wooden shields and waving simple wooden sticks as they followed behind the wolf riders with large strides. The dense cannons exploded in the grass, and the violent shock waves of flames mixed with grass and dust flew in all directions. Most of the wolf riders wore leather armor and wolf helmets. Their defense was so simple that it was hard to look at them directly. Not to mention magic flames. Even a slightly harder piece of mud could leave a purple scar on their body. Once these wolf cavalrymen came into contact with the flames, they would instantly be ignited, turning into a terrifying ball of fire and falling to the ground in the grass, wailing miserably. With the eyeball fighter jets in the sky, the orcs did not even have time to enter the line of sight of the caravan before they were destroyed by the concentrated firepower in the distance. Occasionally, some brave orcs would rush out of the grass against the sky full of cannons, but they would also be blasted into pieces by the magic machine cannons. Orcs were famous for their elemental insulators. It was almost impossible to find magic weapons in the entire Orc Empire, not to mention exquisite magic accessories. Without any external magic resistance, it was simply a joke for them to rely on their strong bodies to resist the piercing of the magic ray. It wasn't that the orcs weren't brave or fearless. However, when they were faced with a powerful wizard who had come from another plane, all of this became fleeting clouds. Apart from falling to the ground and howling in pain, they could not even scratch the skin of the army of magic weapons. Completely crushed. It was a complete and utter crushing. Even the powerhouses of the orc tribes would not be able to escape the coverage fire of the magic cannons as long as they dared to appear within 3 kilometers of the caravan. As they advanced, they slaughtered their way forward. The orcs charged at the caravan fearlessly and crazily with the bravery and bloodthirstiness of their race. Unfortunately, the disparity between the two sides in terms of war was too great, rendering the beastmen's bravery useless. It was a tragic and stirring act of throwing away their lives in vain. The Magi of the Crimson family were all sitting comfortably in the magic chariots, smoking cigars and drinking red wine. Through the surveillance crystal, they slowly admired the orcs struggling to move forward in the midst of the cannon fire. The only one who disturbed their peace was a grade 3 Orc Sword Saint. This fellow relied on his keen intuition and extraordinary speed to break through the periphery and rush into the convoy. As a result, he met the Thunder Dragon arms, who had been disturbed. This Thunder Dragon was truly unrestrained. Even when it came out for a mission, it brought along those foreign concubines. When the Orc Sword Saint attacked, the Thunder Dragon was clean and efficient. It wrapped itself in a bedsheet and rushed out of the chariot, quickly transforming into its Thunder Dragon form. The Orc Sword Saint was a real deal. Every time it swung its strange, long, and thin blade, it could easily cut through the outer armor of the magic chariot. However, its luck came to an end when it encountered the ill-tempered Thunder Dragon arms. Suddenly seeing a terrifying dragon over 30 meters long and feeling its bitingly cold draconic might at close range, the Beastman Sword Saint's heart thumped wildly, and he did his utmost to increase his speed as he circled around the lightning dragon. Occasionally, it would take advantage of the Thunder Dragon's awkward position inside the caravan to dodge the Thunder Dragon's attacks and slash at it a few times. Although the Orc Sword Saint's Gale Slash had failed to penetrate the Thunder Dragon's scales, the Thunder Dragon cried out in pain. Not only had the Thunder Dragon failed to kill it several times, but the Thunder Dragon had also taken advantage of the opportunity to land a few vicious slashes on its body. The Thunder Dragon arms was enraged. Hence, when the Thunder Dragon dodged the Thunder Dragon's frontal attack and charged at it from the back, arms activated the violent elemental lightning in its body. The dazzling lightning engulfed the Thunder Dragon in an instant, and the Orc Sword Saint that had just reached the Thunder Dragon's side was struck by the lightning. The dazzling lightning storm left as quickly as it came. Once the glaring lightning slowly dissipated, the Beastman Sword Saint staggered away from the Thunder Dragon's side. Its body was covered in scorch marks left behind by the lightning, and there were even a few spots where black smoke was curling up. The Orc Sword Saint that had been seriously injured by the Thunder Dragon eventually became a captive of the caravan. As soon as the Thunder Dragon arms won, it transformed back into its human form and rushed back into the war chariot. Inside the chariot, it was as if it was being praised and admired by many concubines. To be honest, these concubines of other races that had followed arms out of Witherwater City should really thank the Thunder Dragon. Without it, they would have stayed in Witherwater City and become sacrifices for the blood sacrifice ceremony. At that time, their fates would have been completely different. Markland City. This was a small city located in the southeastern region of the Great Wasteland. There were no more than 30,000 orcs in the city, and most of them were centaurs that were specially herded by the Orc Empire. Naturally, there was a small Orc Gods temple in the city. The orcs of Markland City had already received news of what had happened to Witherwater City a day ago. However, just as the orcs gathered the 7 servant leaders to discuss how to invade Witherwater City, the news of a witches advancing quickly along the main road towards Markland City reached the meeting hall. The intercepting troops sent by the orc villages along the way had been defeated one after another, and even the famous Grade 3 Orc Sword Saint Sardin had been captured by the witches. Hearing this news, the meeting hall, which had been roaring crazily just now, suddenly froze. All the powerhouses in Markland City were gathered together, but there was only 1 Grade 3 Orc Berserker and 5 Grade 2 Orc powerhouses. Moreover, it was rumored that there was a Tier 3 giant dragon hidden within this aggressive team of witches. If this information was true, how were they supposed to fight this battle? Perhaps this dragon alone was enough to wipe out all the orcs in Markland City, not to mention the terrifying wizard who could control a Grade 3 dragon. If the current situation was changed to that of the humans, the higher-ups of Markland City would definitely choose to escape or surrender. Unfortunately, there was no such word in the orcs' dictionary. Therefore, even though they knew that they could not win, the orcs still chose to resist to the end, swearing to protect the great Orc Gods Temple. Therefore, after half a day, the Crimson Family's Magic Machine Legion arrived at Markland City. Although the orcs were brave, they were not stupid enough to run outside the city and fight with the powerful witches. They hurriedly erected the drawbridge, closed the city gates, and chased a large number of centaur spear throwers to the city walls. With the deep trench barrier and the centaur spear throwers within 50 meters, they were confident that they could block the enemy outside the city. Unfortunately, the enemy they encountered was not an ordinary opponent, but a fully mechanized magic machine legion. The orcs did not want to come out, which was exactly what Grimm wanted. Under Grimm's command, 389 magic machines lined up neatly 100 meters in front of the city gates, waiting for the enemy. Behind a magic machine legion, 20 magic chariots lined up in a row, with a deafening roar of metal from mechanical arms extended from the sides of the chariots, piercing into the ground. Then, black muzzles emerged from the turrets on the chariots' roofs. Magic cannons were 4 to 5 times more powerful than magic ray guns, with an attack range of 170 to 210 degrees. This was a level that a rank 1 elemental magus could achieve with his full strength. More importantly, magic ray guns had an attack range of 30 to 300 meters, while magic cannons had an attack range of 700 meters. Therefore, from the beginning to the end, Grimm did not plan to send the Magic Machine Legion to attack the city. Instead, he wanted to play a cannon battle with the orcs with the idea of reducing casualties. When the magic energy chariot transformed into a long-range cannon, balls of blinding, dense red light began to gather inside the magic energy cannon. 7 seconds later, as the chariots trembled slightly, the fire element magic bullet transformed into a huge fireball and shot out, leaving a trail of red marks in the air as it crossed the city walls and slowly descended into the city. 20 magic chariots, 20 fire element magic bullets. In an instant, the huge fireball engulfed the entire Markland city. The Scarlet Wizards got out of the chariots and stood behind the battle formation, peeking at the nearby Markland city. Huge balls of flames exploded everywhere in the city, bombarding the stone buildings until they were on the verge of collapse. Flames soared into the sky. The entire city was instantly engulfed in a sea of fire. The orc commander, who was lying on the city walls and peeking through the gap, felt a chill run down his spine. What did these witches bring? How could they fire fireballs so far away? Just as he was about to give the order to attack, he was disappointed to find that even the nearest metal giant was hundreds of meters away from the city walls. With the arm strength of the centaurs, it would be difficult to hit the metal giant at such a distance. Chapter 829. Under the command of a 5-meter-tall, strange metal giant, all the magic chariots slowly turned their cannons and aimed at the centaurs and the turrets on the city wall. Dodge! The orc commander's hoarse shout was drowned out by the deafening sound of the cannons. From the east to the west of the city wall, an area of 400 meters was completely blown up by the explosion of the fireball. Limbs and flesh of countless centaurs and orcs were flying in the air. The turrets and fortresses suddenly collapsed in the huge flames, and the shrill screams of the orcs could be heard coming from inside the turrets. Attack! Attack! Everyone attack! Looking at the miserable scene in front of him that seemed like the end of the world, the orc commander cried out his last command. Then, his huge body was blown into pieces in a sudden burst of flames. It was no longer possible to defend the city. If they did not find a way to rush out, all the orcs would be killed before they could even touch the enemy. On top of the city wall, countless strong and capable figures soared into the sky. They had humanoid bodies and strange grayish-brown eagle wings. They held wooden spears in their hands and flew extremely fast. Eagle-bodied. It's the eagle-bodied. Grimm was already prepared for the rare aerial force of the beastmen. As soon as the eagle-bodied rose into the sky, nearly 100 eyeball fighters rushed over before they could form a formation and dive. Along with the eyeball fighters, there was also a dense fire ray. The eagle-bodied were not considered strong among the orcs. In order to reduce their flying weight, they were not equipped with metal armor. The only weapons they carried were 5 short spears and a wooden spear. Their fighting style was to fly above the enemy and shoot with their spears. Only when they ran out of spears would they lift the 3-meter-long wooden spear and dive to the ground. This tactic might be effective against enemies without aerial forces, but it was simply suicidal to use it against the Magic Machine Legion. When the fragile bodies of the eagle-bodied were hit by the dense fire ray, The miserable scene was simply unbearable to look at. One after another, the valiant eagle warriors were still struggling to climb high into the sky when they were caught by the roaring eyeball fighters. Streaks of crimson heat rays struck the ranks of the eaglemen, and almost every attack was able to take down an eagleman warrior. Shrill screams filled the sky as the harpy warriors fell heavily onto the hard ground like weights. Their internal organs instantly ruptured, and they spat out mouthfuls of blood. After that, their lives were easily taken by the neatly arranged magic archers. The tall suspension bridge collapsed, and the half-meter-thick wooden doors were pushed to the sides. Orcs swarmed out of the city. Grim, who knew the enemy's movements like the back of his hand, had already made arrangements. 10 magic energy chariots continued to bombard the city walls, while the other 10 concentrated their fire on the city gate. Before the orcs could cross the drawbridge, 10 huge fireballs exploded in the middle of their ranks. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere, and severed limbs could be seen everywhere. The valiant orcs had just left the city, but before they could even engage the enemy, they were met with a head-on attack. The orcs who were struggling to cross the drawbridge in the face of the cannon fire were met with hundreds of concentrated energy rays in the next second. The orc warriors widened their huge eyes, and before they could even take a few steps forward with their war hammers and sabers raised high in the air, they were already riddled with holes. They staggered forward, and the numerous bloody holes on their bodies spurted out blood. Finally, they knelt on the ground and crawled forward with the last of their strength. The second wave of energy rays swept across the battlefield, and the tragic battlefield fell silent once more. When the strength of the two armies was not on the same level, the bravery of an individual could no longer change the course of the battle. Batch after batch of beastmen rushed out, only to fall down one after another. The cycle repeated itself, bloody and cruel. But no matter how much the orcs charged, they could not break through the invisible line of defense, nor could they touch the rows of tall and mighty metal giants 100 steps away. The enemy's cannon fire was too fierce, so fierce that their flesh and blood could not resist it at all. Finally, after leaving thousands of corpses in front of the city gate, the orcs wailed and retreated back into the city. The Magic Mechanical Legion also took the opportunity to extend their cannons and continue to bombard the remaining tall buildings in Markland City. The orcs hid at the base of the city wall, holding wooden shields above their heads, and suffered bitterly, waiting for the moment when the enemy would rush into the city. Since they could not rush out, they would wait for the enemy to enter the city and then fight them in the streets. With the ferocity and bravery of the orcs, if they really fought in close combat, even if the enemy was made of steel, they could still tear off a few kilograms of flesh from them. Unfortunately, they underestimated Grimm's determination and also underestimated the terror of the Magic Mechanical Legion with the clone Brain Jellu. The 5-meter-tall metal body of the clone Brain Jellu stood in the center of the Magic Mechanical Legion. At every moment, its body shot out blue energy bands, connecting itself with the surrounding Magic Mechanical Legion. Both the magic archers and the magic chariots could obtain appropriate magic energy from it through these energy bands. As long as it was there, the Magic Mechanical Legion would never run out of energy. Not a single orc or servant could be seen in the huge Markland city. Everyone was hiding in the dark, hiding in the ruins, enduring the bombardment and cleansing of the magic cannons over and over again. Under the continuous bombardment of 20 magic cannons, the solid 8-meter-tall city wall finally collapsed, scattering into rubble all over the ground. The eyeball mechs that killed the team of eaglemen flew into Markland City in groups, quickly searching for the remaining lives in the city at a height of 20 meters above the ground. Be it the collapsed stone castles or the blackened stone houses, the eyeball mech was able to maneuver in and out of them agilely, sweeping every dark corner with its sizzling heat beam. The remaining orcs also used all means to fight these eyeball mechs, throwing axes, casting nets, and jumping into the air. The number of eyeball mechs decreased sharply. Dong, dong, dong. A series of heavy footsteps that shook the mountains resounded on the battlefield. Rows of metal magic mechanical legion in a loose formation stepped on the broken city walls and blackened beams, slowly entering the city. They did not spread out, nor did they try to search the narrow and dark places. Once the strange gems installed in their eye sockets sensed the life aura under the ruins, they would shoot out like a goblin rocket. The orcs that were hiding in the dark had just rushed out, but they were shot full of holes by dozens of energy rays. Almost all the buildings in the city were razed to the ground, and even if there were some that survived, they could not withstand the attacks of the magic mechanical legion. Wherever he went, he would push everything in his path. Wherever he went, walls and houses would collapse, and dust would fly everywhere. When they encountered the orcs that were hiding in the fortified fort, the magic mechanical legion only had to summon the magic cannons to attack. Everything returned to dust to dust, and became completely silent. When nearly 100 magic mechanical legions raised their ray guns and arrived in front of the small orc shrine, the remaining 2,000 orcs and centaurs of Markland City were entrenched there. They used their flesh and blood to form a human wall, facing off against the magic mechanical legion in an unusually tragic manner. After 2 hours of bombardment, there were not many orcs and centaurs that were unscathed. Even the grade 3 orc berserker was covered in blood, and the beast hide on his body was burnt black. The grade 2 orcs around him were also injured, and their heads were bleeding. It was a tragic sight to behold. At this moment, the orc berserker stood at the front of the formation, a huge double-edged battle axe on his back, and a tall and rough tribal flag was held tightly in his hands. There was no wind on the battlefield, but the beast hide of the flag was completely unfurled, and the image of an orc holding a war hammer high and roaring at the sky could be clearly seen. Grim led the Scarlet Magi into the battlefield and stood 100 meters away, facing off against the remaining orcs. The orcs glared at every magus present with bloodshot eyes, their eyes filled with extreme hatred. The Warhammer tribe in Markland City was finished. They had lost their territory, their citizens, and most of their orc warriors. Next, they would lose the orc shrine, the only source of faith for the orcs. Magi, why did you attack our city, kill our citizens, and destroy our shrine? Why? Perhaps the orc berserker knew that he was at the end of his rope, and his voice was hoarse, filled with grief and resentment. There is no why. There may be many reasons, but I don't need to explain them to you. You and I are just chess pieces that have no choice. Your responsibility is to protect this city, and mine is to destroy this plane. As for the reason, who cares? Grim replied coldly. Knowing that it was impossible to get an answer from Grim, the orc berserker stopped the huge flag in his hand, and the tall, sturdy flagpole pierced through the ground and stayed in place. The orc berserker reached out and grabbed the giant axe on his back, roaring as he charged at Grim. As he charged, the orc berserker let out a battle cry that shook the hearts of people, and his body that was originally 2 meters tall expanded once again. Every time he stomped on the ground with his bare black feet, an oppressive tremor would be heard. From afar, it sounded like the beating of a war drum. Asterisk pu. Asterisk a series of concentrated scorching rays were like red-hot soldering irons, striking the orc berserker's sturdy body. The orc berserker only raised his giant axe to cover his face, and then suddenly leapt up, allowing the scorching rays to continue shooting at him. The scorching rays that could normally pierce through walls only burned tiny red spots on the orc berserker's taut black body, but did not penetrate his hard skin. A sinister and terrifying smile appeared on the orc berserker's face, and the giant axe in his hand glowed with a misty light as he quickly swung it. The giant axe was only 2 meters long, so it was impossible for it to touch the metal weapons that were 20 to 30 meters away. However, as the light on the giant axe flew out, a terrifying ripple that was 1/2 meter long instantly passed through the bodies of the 5 magic archers. Chapter 830. The orc berserker was on a killing spree. It opened its mouth wide, revealing a ferocious and twisted smile that was comparable to that of a wild beast. Its arms that were wielding the giant axe seemed to have grown a whole size, its bulging muscles wriggling continuously. Thick veins that were as thick as small snakes squirmed under its skin. Under the support of the terrifying divine power, a tyrannical and explosive power surged crazily in its body. Its mind was gradually overwhelmed by the impact, and it only wanted to kill its way into the crowd and destroy everything that it did not like. Behind the orc berserker's body, which had doubled in size, an orc holding a war hammer and roaring at the sky could be clearly seen, just like the tribe's flag that was fluttering in the wind. After receiving the divine power, the orc berserker, which was already incomparably violent, became even more unstoppable. Its bare feet made thumping sounds as it stomped on the ground. Every step it took left a small crater in the ground where it had been standing. And with every step it took, the giant axe in its hand would swing rapidly. Under the terrifying power ripples, not a single metal magic machine could withstand the attacks of the Grade 3 Orc Berserker. Actually, the power ripples of the Orc Berserker were not considered to be spells or abilities, nor were they battle techniques that knights or other combatants could use after combining their life energy. It was just a type of violent power. The Orc Berserker's strength had already reached 37 points, which was already an unstoppable divine power. At least within the plane, there were few that could match its strength. Hence, every time it swung its giant axe, the violent power would compress the air in front of the axe in the shortest time possible, compressing it into a visible air ripple, which would then surge out. Just like that, even though the Orc Berserker did not have any long-range battle techniques, it was still able to use its unstoppable divine power to create an alternative long-range attack. This kind of air ripple might not be able to travel far, but within a range of 20 to 30 meters, it was indestructible, violent, and cheap. As it ran, it destroyed everything in its path. In front of the Grade 3 Orc Berserker, the Grade 1 magic archers were like a bunch of matchstick people made of wooden sticks, scattering in all directions at the slightest touch. Not to mention stopping the enemy's advance. Even slowing down the enemy's advance was beyond their capabilities. In the past battles, the Grade 1 metal magic machinery had always relied on its powerful strength and indestructible body to crush its enemies. However, after encountering this Beastman Berserker today, they had also become the targets to be crushed. The entire battle scene was cruel and indescribably tragic. Although the Orc Berserker had entered a berserk state and was in a daze, it still knew that its greatest enemy was the red-robed, red-haired, black-eyed human wizard. Therefore, even though it was slaughtering, its bulky and somewhat distorted body was still madly charging towards Grim. A Tier 3 Orc Berserker only needed 8 seconds to cross 100 meters. In the blink of an eye, the Beastman Berserker had killed his way through the magic archers and was now in front of Grim. Behind it, there were 17 metal magic machines lying on the ground. They were either sliced at the waist, sliced diagonally, or shattered into pieces. Not a single one of them was intact. The sounds of explosions rose and fell continuously. Asterisk whoosh, asterisk the giant axe whistled through the air, 1 horizontal and 3 vertical. For air ripples abruptly struck towards Grim. Such a powerful attack could not be blocked by spells alone. This was also the main reason why most spellcasters did not like to engage in close combat with combatants. Most spells cast by spellcasters, even those single-target spells, only slightly condensed elemental energy. When a spell was cast, it was still a type of scattered energy. However, all combatants could condense their own energy again and again. Even if they used it, it would not dissipate, and the energy would always be gathered at a single point. This gave combatants a strange ability to penetrate defense that far surpassed spellcasters. As a Grade 2 magma shield, Grim's magma shield might be able to block 2 to 3 attacks from a magus of the same rank, but it could not block a single close-range attack from a combatant of the same rank. Therefore, when he was faced with a Tier 3 Orc Berserker's berserk attack, He immediately leapt out without hesitation. The sound of flames exploding could be heard. Following the explosion of the ring of flames, Grimm's tall figure appeared in an empty space 100 meters away. Mary let out a delicate shout and turned into a ghostly, bloody shadow, clashing with the orc berserker in a frenzy. Although it was a fight, it was actually a one-sided attack from the orc berserker, while Mary was frantically dodging. Ever since she had raised her strength to grade 2 and encountered many powerful enemies, Mary had accumulated some tactics and methods to deal with high-level enemies. Although the orc berserker in front of her had 37 points of strength, its agility was only 18 points at most. With this kind of stats, it might be able to crush grade 1 creatures. But when it faced the Blood Queen Mary with 27 points of agility, its berserk attacks could not keep up with Mary's swift movements. However, even after Mary circled around the orc berserker countless times and experimented with her super corrosive claws, she still could not penetrate the invisible life force field around the orc berserker's body. In a high magic world, things like spirit and life force, which could not be seen or touched, could form a frightening power if they were concentrated to a certain extent, especially when the life force was large enough to distort space and magnetic fields. An invisible life barrier would appear. Outside the life force field, Mary could still rely on her high agility to dodge the orc berserker's clumsy and violent attacks. However, the moment she entered the orc berserker's life force field, the slightest hesitation or mistake could bring a terrible disaster upon herself. With the Tier 3 orc berserker's attack power, as long as it landed a solid hit, Mary would be smashed into pieces and her entire body would explode. Although such an attack might not be able to kill her in one hit, she was not willing to experience that kind of terrifying pain. The battle between Mary and the orc berserker caused a huge commotion. Wherever the violent air ripples passed, the Crimson Magi would dodge, and even the metal magic equipment would not be able to avoid them in time. 100 meters away, Grimm roared, and 3 terrifying 6-meter-tall flamed demons rose from the ground, once again becoming the focus of everyone's attention. Kill! With a deep and muffled roar, Grimm, who had turned into a Balrog, gave the order to attack. A large number of archers and shield-bearers trampled over the ruins as they charged towards the remaining orcs. Among the charging metal magic army, the Tier 3 Thunder Dragon's huge and ferocious figure was especially eye-catching. Seeing this high-level magical creature that should have only existed in legends, the berserk will of the orc berserker suddenly stagnated. His mind that had lost its reason was actually showing signs of recovering under the pressure of the vast and mighty dragon might that was pouncing on him. However, under the influence of the orc's barbaric and violent nature, the orc berserker roared and charged at the thunder dragon arms. The battle came to an end half an hour later. Unsurprisingly, the remaining orcs were defeated by the devil mechanical army that swarmed over, and there were many casualties. The battle only came to an end when the last orc berserker standing guard in front of the shrine was defeated. When Grimm, who had transformed into a Balrog, appeared in front of the temple, 3 skinny and withered orc shamans stood in front of him, trembling. The 1.8-meter-tall orc shamans might not be small for humans, but for the 6-meter-tall flame demon, they were as small as dwarves. Grimm lowered his head and stared coldly at the orc shamans in front of him with his eyes that were burning with bright yellow flames. He mocked in a grand and arrogant voice, 1 grade 2 and 2 grade 1. What? Do you intend to stop me with your puny bodies? The 3 orc shamans had obviously exhausted their stamina and energy after a day and night of prayer. However, what made them even more desperate was that they could not contact the great orc god. As if there was some powerful interference, the orc god's shrine had lost all contact with the main shrine in Pompeii City, let alone the high and mighty orc god. Without the blessing of the orc god, the strength of the orc warriors in battle was greatly reduced. If the beast god hall had not accumulated a portion of the power of faith and barely protected its surroundings, the entire hall would have collapsed from the fierce bombardment just now. Now, the only grade 3 orc berserker in the city was lying in a pool of blood. Although the Grade 3 Thunder Dragon was also injured, it was recovering quickly with the help of the wizards. As for the other orcs, they had either died in battle or had their limbs broken. They could no longer protect the shrine. At this moment, the only ones who could stop the enemies in Markland City were the 3 old and weak orc shamans. Evil invaders, as long as you can leave this place, we will not pursue the crimes you've committed. A skinny orc shaman who looked like an old man shouted at the top of his lungs. His skinny body was covered in dark purple spots. He had only spoken a few words, but he was already gasping for breath. His chest gave off a strange, snoring sound, making him look like an old-fashioned set of bellows. Just by looking, one could tell that this old fellow did not have long to live. However, the bravery and glory of the orcs in his body forced him to stand straight in front of the burning man, using his thin and weak body to stop him from advancing. Pursue? Ha ha! Grim threw his head back and laughed as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. You might not have heard me clearly, but let me tell you again. We are not here to invade you. We are here to destroy this plane. Chapter 831. The once bustling city of Markland was now in ruins. Apart from the rubble and stones that could not be destroyed, all the wood and building facilities were burnt to the ground in a terrible fire. When the fire was finally extinguished and the temperature of the fire dropped a little, the magic corps began to collect the spoils of war under the command of the goblin engineer. Grim, on the other hand, did not care. He led a group of crimson sorcerers into the beast god's temple and carefully examined every inch of the ground and every pattern. The power system of the Johnson plane was significantly different from that of the sorcerer world. The orcs focused more on digging out the potential and explosive power of their bodies. They worshipped the beast god and obtained a large number of divine spells from him. However, most of these divine spells were used to improve one's physique and the duration of the explosive power. They could not be used as main combat skills. Unlike the wizards, the orc shamans did not focus on acquiring knowledge and skills. Instead, they devoted themselves to the praise and worship of the beast god. As long as they could win the favor of the beast god, they could rely on the power of divine spells to increase their level and strengthen themselves. Therefore, in the Johnson Plain, the beast god temple was the only way for the orc shamans to communicate with the beast god. Grim and the others destroyed the beast god temple in Markland City, which meant that the area within a few hundred miles could no longer obtain the divine power of the beast god. If they fought with the witches, without the divine power of the beast god, the beastmen in the Johnson Plain would just be a group of slightly stronger beasts. They would no longer be a threat. If the beast god was a source of divine power, then the beast god temple was its divine power relay station. Relying on the divine power relay station of the beast god temple, the orc villages in the surrounding area could obtain the opportunity to communicate with the beast god through the simple beast god altar. This was what the wizards called the faith channel, or simply the message channel. This message channel was two-sided. It could gather the faith of the orc believers and pass it to the beast god. It could also bathe the divine power of the beast god in the bodies of the orc believers. The higher the size of the altar, the wider the message channel. For example, the small beast god altar in the orc villages could at most transmit some grade 1 power. Only the slightly larger orc towns and villages had a chance of transmitting tier 2 power. As for small and medium-sized cities like Markland City and Drywater City, they could only transmit grade 3 power at most. In the whole of the orc empire, there were only 3 large shrines capable of transporting grade 4 power, including the main shrine in Pompeii City. As long as they avoided these 3 areas and survived the first wave of the orcs, the northern witches were confident that they could complete this difficult task. As a veteran of plane invasions, Grim had a deep understanding of this basic process. However, right now, he devoted all of his attention to analyzing and studying the beast god hall before him. If an ordinary beastman was a one-way receiver, then the beast god's temple was a relay console that could send and receive signals. From, orcs with or off from the or, from the dragon. Wizard books of the from. God from wizard, God from the god, from the wizard, from Sora from the majors. From wizard from of Grimm had read about a group of very special arcanists in a certain corner of the multiverse. As spellcasters, they had the ability to cast spells freely, just like wizards, magi, and warlocks. However, one of the main reasons why they were distinguished from mages and wizards was that they were extremely adept at teamwork. They gathered small amounts of power for public use, and then used everyone's power for their own use. This made it easier to cast spells, and made meditation less difficult. It was said that the greatest inventions of the arcanists were the mana pool and the spell pool. These two terrifying magic facilities. The mana pool, as the name suggested, was a special facility used to gather magic energy. With it, arcanists did not have to painstakingly meditate to accumulate magic energy, nor did they have to slowly increase their spiritual force day after day, year after year. During their daily meditation, they would store the excess magic power accumulated from meditation into the mana pool. When they were fighting outside, they could use special methods to draw or overdraft the pure magic energy in the mana pool. The function of the spell pool was similar, except that what was stored in it was not pure magic energy, but real spells that had taken shape. In their daily lives, arcanists constantly stored spells that they did not need in the spell pool, and when they needed them, they would draw them out or overdraft more. In this way, any arcanist would be able to turn into a terrifying magic cannon, relying on an endless stream of magic attacks to wear down or tire out any opponent of the same level. However, such arcanists also had a huge flaw, which was that their spiritual force would always be much lower than that of opponents of the same level. Once their spiritual connection with the mana pool and the spell pool was cut off, their strength would instantly degrade from master magician to apprentice magician. Therefore, in order to avoid being far away from their mana pools and spell pools, the Grand Arcanists at the 8th level even developed a strange arcana tower that could fly in the sky and travel the world with the Grand Arcanists. In this way, the Grand Arcanists quickly became an extremely powerful force in the multiverse. It was a pity that this group of Grand Arcanists, who loved knowledge more than their own lives, ultimately fell at the hands of a powerful god. The magnificent arcane empire that they had once built vanished like smoke, becoming ancient ruins left in the depths of many plains, waiting for people to explore and excavate. The reason why they had lost was because of an abnormally powerful goddess of magic. At that time, the arcane empire was abnormally powerful and prosperous. In order to obtain more apprentices with talent in the elements, they casually invaded the large and small plains ruled by the world of gods, unbridledly spreading arcane knowledge and nurturing apprentices. The powerful gods of the world of gods were naturally dissatisfied with this, and had fought with the arcanists many times. It was a pity that with the help of many magic facilities and arcane towers, even the main gods found it difficult to defeat the powerful Grand Arcanists. In the end, some Grand Arcanists even displayed the spirit of academic research to the extreme and began to unscrupulously capture gods to study their secrets. If the Grand Arcanists had only fought with the gods over planes and worshippers, the world of gods would not have been so angry. However, when the Grand Arcanists targeted the gods and began to dissect and study them like inferior magical creatures, the gods of the world of gods were infuriated. They could not defeat the Grand Arcanists, nor could they compete with them. What could they do? The powerful gods that had lived for hundreds of thousands of years discussed and came up with an extremely sinister and terrifying battle plan. With their cooperation and discussion, a goddess of magic who had the power of a main god, Grade 8, destroyed her own divine kingdom and scattered her worshippers. She actually gave up on her immortal divine body and reincarnated into a little girl with astonishing talent. The little girl who had reincarnated was coincidentally discovered by the Grand Arcanists and was brought back to the Arcane Tower. Bit by bit, she was nurtured into a magic apprentice, an arcanist, a high-ranked arcanist, and eventually the youngest great arcanist. Ever since she was an apprentice, she had begun to promote a grand magic network. However, this shocking idea was only taken seriously by the other great arcanists after she had become a great arcanist, and they began to research it together. The young and beautiful great arcanist hoped that all the great arcanists would contribute their mana pools and spell pools in the spirit of dedication and sharing. With these powerful arcane towers as the foundation, they would build a powerful magic network that could cover the entire multiverse. In this way, no matter grand arcanists, senior rank arcanists, or common arcanists, they would be able to connect to the magic network in any area of the multiverse at will. They would be able to arm themselves with the powerful magic power in the mana pool and defeat all the enemies with ill intentions. Such a grand and beautiful idea came from the mouth of a young and beautiful great arcanist, and it deeply moved all the great arcanists. Under the worship and strong impetus of these male great arcanists who had been lonely for thousands of years, the construction of the magic network was carried out in full swing. After thousands of years, and with the combined power of 15 great arcanists, they had finally completed the preliminary construction and connection of the magic network. In order to commemorate the young and beautiful great arcanist, they decided to use her arcane tower as the core to try to start and operate the entire magic network. Unfortunately, at the most crucial moment of the ceremony, the great arcanist who was the host and operator of the magic network was willing to sacrifice her life, detonating the entire magic network. As the magic network was now connected to the arcane towers of all the great arcanists, they then connected to all the mid-ranked and high-ranked arcane towers. As such, this earth-shattering explosion affected all the Arcana Masters and their Arcana Towers. Without a doubt, most of the Arcanists, including the Great Arcanists, had died in the explosion. The goddess of magic, whose body had been destroyed once more, was warmly welcomed by all the gods after her soul escaped back to the world of gods. With the help of a few powerful divine systems, this magic which actually ascended to the throne of the God King, becoming a rare rank 9 god. In the past, when he had read these ancient records, Grimm had mostly admired the patience and foresight of the gods. However, now that he had truly come into contact with the world of gods, he had a strange feeling, as if the gods had plagiarized the achievements of the Arcanists in some aspects. The information path before him, as well as its use, made him think of the ancient Arcanists who had existed. Chapter 832. The battle at the Beast God Temple ended in a hurry. The Magic Corps stayed at the ruins of Markland City for 2 days, repairing the magic equipment and eyeball mecha that had been destroyed in the battle. Grimm also took the opportunity to thoroughly scan the entire Beast God Temple, as well as the magic patterns and divine runes engraved on it. After doing all this, the Magic Corps once again set out on their journey. Before they left, the Beast God Temple collapsed under the continuous bombardment of the magic cannons. Under the protection of a large number of magic archers, the magic chariots advanced towards the next Orc city. Grimm and Alice hid in a narrow cabin, studying the spoils of war they had seized from the Beast God Temple in Markland City. Regardless of whether Grimm believed it or not, the biggest spoil of war he had obtained after destroying Markland City was the huge flag of the Orc tribe that had been planted on the battlefield by a rank 3 Orc berserker. After a thorough scan by the AI chip, Grimm confirmed that this flag of the Warhammer tribe had the ability to gather souls. This meant that the souls of all the Orcs who had died bravely on the battlefield had been attached to this flag, becoming a strange existence similar to a bound spirit. With the spiritual force of ordinary Orcs, it was naturally impossible for them to preserve their consciousness and memories after leaving their physical bodies. Hence, the only things that remained were some simple instincts of the soul and the fervor of battle. After hundreds and thousands of years, countless Orc souls had gathered in this beast hide flag, using their collective will to condense a few strange existences. In the Orc tribes, these Orc souls were called valiant spirits. These valiant spirits did not have real bodies, and could only attach themselves to the tribe's totems to maintain their existence. The key to their survival was the power of faith and new soul energy. They could absorb the power of faith around the flag, as well as the souls of the orc warriors who had died in battle. Of course, when the power of faith they absorbed reached a certain level, it would be absorbed by the beast god into his divine kingdom. The most outstanding of the valiant spirits would also be selected to enter the beast god's divine kingdom. They would be reconstructed with divine force and continue to fight for the mighty beast god on another level. These totems with heroic spirits could also bring powerful magic support to the Beastmen tribe. Under the strange halo of the tribe's totem, all the Beastmen's physique, strength, agility, spirit, flexibility, reflexes, everything would be greatly improved. Therefore, the stronger the heroic spirit of a Beastman tribe, the more shocking their battle prowess. Among the large orc tribes that had existed for tens of thousands of years, there were even existences that were more powerful than heroic spirits, ancestral spirits. Not only could they increase the Beastman's combat power through the blessing of the halo, but they could also temporarily leave the tribe's totem and possess the tribe's strongest warrior, doubling their combat power. In the past, this was a special ability that only oracles had. Because of the Great Witch's obstruction, the beast god *** had yet to send any avatars or incarnations into the Johnson dimension, but it was still possible to transmit some power through the channel. If, in the later stages of the battle, a rank 4 orc oracle appeared and used the spirit possession move, it would be difficult to rely on just a few rank 4 witches. Therefore, the more Grimm understood the hidden strength of the Johnson dimension, the more careful he became. His current strength was at a level where he could not compare to the strong. When he transformed into the terrifying Balrog, the flame set would guarantee him the strength to crush those of the same rank. However, against a rank 3 opponent, his attacks might be able to cause some damage, but his body was slightly weaker. Fortunately, he had the rank 3 Thunder Dragon arms to act as his bodyguard, helping him take care of the arrogant rank 3 enemies. Otherwise, the Magic Machine Legion would have long been reduced to scrap metal by the endless orcs. Along the way, the one who gained the most was not Grimm, but Mary, who reaped the benefits of others' hard work. Regardless of whether it was the grade 3 orc shaman she had killed in the first battle, the grade 3 orc sword saint she had captured along the way, or the orc berserker she had killed in Markland City, their blood had not been wasted, and they had all been sucked dry by Mary. This caused Mary to be sleepy these days, as if she had eaten too much. The 4 defecting magi who had come with the team were no longer as resistant to the Crimson family as they had been in the past after getting used to each other. Whether it was their daily vigilance or their cooperation with the magic machines, although they did not do anything eye-catching, they were very cooperative and well-behaved. With these subordinates sharing the workload, Grimm became more relaxed. Grimm did not bother with the small orcs along the way, leaving them to the Crimson Magi to deal with. Grimm would only bring out arms to deal with the more powerful rank 2 or 3 orcs, and they would quickly deal with them. For the rest of the time, Grimm did not leave his room at all. Under Alice's guidance, he silently studied the tribe's flag. The AI chip's analysis was progressing smoothly. The strange runes from the Orc God's shrine had been mostly analyzed, and the rest could be analyzed before they returned. The reason why the AI chip's analysis was progressing so quickly was partly due to Grimm's spiritual force, and partly due to the stupidity and straightforwardness of the orcs. One had to know that even in the Magus world, only 60% to 70% of the runes in most runic spell formations were truly meaningful. The rest of the runes were just mixed in to confuse the enemy. Many Magus formations would even have complicated, exquisite, and useless patterns drawn on purpose to conceal the true purpose of the Magus formation. However, the strange spell formations and divine runes that Grimm had scanned from the Orc God's shrine had not been modified or disguised. As long as he could analyze the effects of the corresponding runes, the mechanism of the spell formation would be clear at a glance. This also reduced the Chip's trial and error work, saving Grimm a lot of time. From the looks of the runes, it seemed to cover almost 30% of the Cheongsin Plains mystical domain. If he could completely understand it, he would be able to bring Grimm's mastery of magic patterns to a whole new level. At the very least, Grimm's Balrog transformation would increase his strength even more. The next orc city was Andoril, which was more than 400 kilometers away. In just 2 days, the Magic Machine Corps had broken through the intercepting troops and appeared at the foot of Andoril. Looking from afar, this was still a small city filled with the orc style. The towering city walls were made of large rocks piled up, and there were many sharpened wooden stakes wedged into them. Some even had dried bones nailed into them. From their clothes and the size of the bones, they seemed to belong to some defeated races. There were many turrets on the city walls, and there were also many forts unique to the orcs. These forts were low and had small entrances. There were also countless openings around them, which were used by the short ratfolk warriors to stab their spears inside. Within the city, all the buildings were abnormally tall and majestic. Their surfaces had not been carefully polished, so they looked crude. It seemed that the orcs of Andohar City had long known about the arrival of the Magic Mechanical Legion. At a glance, there were almost no orcs in the city. Only some green-skinned orcs and wolf riders could be vaguely seen on the towering city walls. How were we going to fight this battle? A few scarlet sorcerers gathered in front of Mary and waited for her instructions. Mary sat on top of a magic chariot and glanced at Andoril from afar. She sneered. "Yudi, you will lead 100 magic archers, 30 shield bearers, and 5 magic chariots to the left side. After the battle starts, the wolf riders hiding 5 kilometers away might attack our troops from there. There might be tens of thousands of them. Remember, don't let any of them come here." "Yes." "O'Neill, you will lead 50 magic archers, 20 shield bearers, and 5 magic chariots to the right side. According to the reconnaissance of the eyeball matches, there are about 7,000 orc warriors hiding in the dense forest 3 kilometers away. Seal them inside for me." "Yes." "Desira, I'll leave the main battlefield to you. You will have 100 magic archers, 30 shield bearers, and 10 magic chariots. Bombard this city and flatten everything inside." "Yes, Lady Mary." "The rest of you stay by my side and wait for the enemy's main force to appear." "Yes." "Yes." Medusa Merrill and Berserk, which Sophia responded in unison, while the other 2 new sorcerers also nodded submissively. As for the clone Brain Jelu and the goblin Tigul, they stood at the side leisurely and did not respond to Mary. It cannot be helped. The 3 of them were all grade 2 and had their own factions and backers. They did not need to listen to Mary's orders. As the leader of this team, Grimm did not show himself in this battle. He only released the plague poison spirit and the sewing puppet that he had painstakingly raised. The enemies they had come into contact with these days were too strong. Most of them were grade 2 or 3, so it had been a long time since the 2-peak grade 1 mutants had gone on a killing spree. Using this opportunity, it was time for them to have a good meal. As the huge fireballs shot by the magic cannons flew into the city, a new battle broke out. Learning from the painful lesson of Markland City, the orc commander of this city did not withdraw all his troops into the city. Instead, he deployed them on the outskirts. As soon as the enemy began to attack the city, the wolf riders and orc army that were lying in ambush in the distance attacked the magic army from the left and right. Chapter 833. Unfortunately, the orc commander's plan was perfect, but unfortunately, he ran into Grimm and the others. With the astonishing number of eyeball matches, the battlefield was almost completely transparent. No matter how well the orc cavalry and orc army hid, they could not escape the detection of the eyeball matches. Such a large, dazzling red spot of light was hidden in the wilderness and dense forest. Unless the commander of the Devil Corps was super blind, he would not be able to see it. Once they were prepared, the traps that the orcs had arranged in advance were so childish that it was laughable. The difference in military strength between the 2 sides forced the orcs to find ways to make up for it with tactics. However, When it came to the art of war, the simple-minded orcs did not seem to have any other strategies or tactics to speak of other than swinging their broadswords and rushing to the enemy's side while enduring the enemy's long-range attacks. Therefore, the Battle of Endoril only proved the power of the wizard army and the orc tribe's strength from another perspective. Every orc army member was a top-notch individual. Whether it was physical fitness or individual combat ability, they were far superior to the human army. Unfortunately, when they faced the wizard's devil core, the difference between strength and weakness was reversed. The indestructible had become the enemy, and the unstoppable had instead become himself. The battle only lasted for 3 hours before it ended. The orc commander, who knew that he had no hope of winning, blew the horn to retreat. The orc warriors, dragging their injured bodies, could only swallow the bitter fruit and flee into the distance without looking back. Since it was a field battle, once the orcs were defeated, the Devil Corps would not be able to catch up at all. The Devil Corps relied on the ferocity of the magic cannons and the frequent attacks of magic rays to resist the orcs' tide-like attacks. They did not dare to break up their formation and capture the fleeing enemies in the wild. Otherwise, if they were ambushed by the powerful orcs, the Devil Corps would undoubtedly suffer great losses. Moreover, the purpose of their attack this time was not to kill many orcs, but to destroy the orc temple as much as possible. That was the most important task of this mission. When fighting in the city, the Devil Corps was ambushed by a team of powerful orcs and lost as many as 30 magic machines. However, the Tier 2 orc powerhouses were still injured by the magic archers' concentrated laser attacks. The Johnson plane lacked anti-magic equipment. The beastmen only wore leather armor made from the fur of high-level monsters. Although they had some anti-magic properties, they could not withstand the attacks of the magic archers. When they rushed into the magic machine team and started killing, the magic archers did not care if they would accidentally hurt their teammates. They were all pouring magic rays at the highest frequency. They could still withstand such an attack for half a minute. But how many demonic machines could they kill in just half a minute? Moreover, there were a large number of shield guardians in the middle of the team. Once the steel tower shields in their hands were used for close-range defense, they would naturally be greeted with a barrage of concentrated fire and shockingly powerful spells. The Plague Poison Spirit's killing power was very weak, but its ability to spread diseases was second to none. In the previous battle, while the orcs were retreating, the Plague Poison Spirit had scattered many plague spores and attached them to the bodies of the defeated orcs. As the orcs retreated to the surrounding villages, these plague spores would also be brought to the various gathering points of the orcs. That would be the time when the Plague Poison Spirit would show its true power. As for the sewing puppet, it was a mutant with a spiritual body, and it was the nemesis of the orc warriors. Its strange body, made of cloth and fragments, was not afraid of any physical attack. The 3 soul guards it commanded had the ability to directly attack the enemy's soul. This also meant that the strong physique of the orcs was useless in front of them. Instead, they could easily be invaded by the soul guards and become the sewing puppet's soul slaves. The large amount of high-quality flesh and blood on the battlefield made these flesh-eating aberrations even more brutal and vicious. The sewing puppet was like a terrifying ghost, wandering on the battlefield. The 3 soul guards beside it would rush into the body of an orc warrior from time to time. If the invasion failed, the soul guard would turn into a white light and rush out, quickly looking for the next target. If the invasion was successful, the orc warrior would become the sewing puppet's slave, turning the weapon in his hand and attacking his companions. Once the soul slave died, his soul would be brought back by the soul guards to be eaten by the sewing puppet. Relying on the wanton killing of the 3 soul guards, the sewing puppet's soul aura became stronger and stronger, showing signs of advancing on the battlefield. To be honest, after following Grimm for so long and experiencing countless battles, it was time for them to advance again. Otherwise, they would not be able to keep up with Grimm's insane advancement speed. Anhidor City was easily taken down by Mary and the others. For some reason, there were no grade 3 orcs in this battle, and only a few Grade 2 orcs tried to delay the advance of the Devil Machine Legion by fighting in the streets. Unfortunately, they were also attacked by Mary and Tigul. After occupying Andohar City and wiping out the remaining orcs and shamans, Grim slowly came out of the chariot. In this battle, he obtained another tribal banner, as well as many new Beastman runes. And these things were enough to support his research for the rest of the journey. The third orc city was called Gordoni City, which was only about 200 kilometers away from Andohar. Unfortunately, when Grim and the others rushed to Gordoni City, they found that the city was empty and not a single orc could be seen. What happened to the first two orc cities had already spread to Gordoni City. The number and strength of orcs in this city was far less than that of Markland City and Andohar City. So the orcs who knew that they could not resist could only escape into the wilderness with their families. However, they did not know that along the way, Grim had already sent the plague poison spirit to attack everywhere, spreading plague spores in every orc village or town that the team passed by, polluting the water there. Grim had even intentionally released a large number of orc captives, and before they left, he had also sprayed them with highly concealed plague bacteria. As long as they escaped back to their homes and returned to the orc gathering place, the orcs there would also spread a terrifying plague in a month's time. Grim's only reason for doing this was to reduce the number of orcs on a large scale and attack their belief system, making the final preparations for the upcoming Plain War. And Grim was not the only one who did this. It could be said that every witch unit that went out on a mission had received a similar task of spreading the plague or spreading the disease. Since the witches did not intend to occupy this place, they did not hold back. With the poor medical system in Johnson Plain and the pitiful number of shamans, it was impossible for them to lead the orcs to escape this disaster. When the civilization of the sorcerer world collided with the civilization of Johnson Plain, it was simply a crushing defeat. Without the support of the foreign orc god, the northern witches could easily subdue the orcs and make them slaves for the northern witches. But now, in order to establish their power, the witches were going to destroy Johnson Plain by force. This also meant that every native creature living in the Johnson Plain would be annihilated in a month's time. They would become one of the countless resentful souls of the plains. As for how to destroy a plain, Grim only vaguely knew that they needed to destroy the plain's source. However, the specific method was strictly kept a secret by the high-grade witches, so Grim did not know. In any case, it was related to the blood sacrifice ceremony that the Witch of Death was currently preparing in Drywater City. Since the witches had kept the secret well, the Orc Empire had yet to discover their abnormal actions. They were still amassing a large number of troops in the distance, according to the process of defending against the invasion of the plain. They were waiting to contact the Lord Orc God before expelling these hateful witches in one fell swoop. These stupid orcs did not know that the witches were not here to invade, but to destroy them. The witches who were out on missions were also taking advantage of the orcs' hesitation and desperately attacking everywhere, uprooting all the orc cities and orc temples within 1,000 miles of Drywater City. This way, even if the orc army fought back, they would first have to face the no man's land and the terrifying plague-infested area. With just this one move, the witches had destroyed the orc army that was still gathering. If the Orc Empire wanted to stop the northern witches, it seemed that they had no other way other than to gather all the powerful orcs. Only these orcs above Grade 2 could pass through the plague-infested area and reach Drywater City safely. As for the ordinary orcs, they would simply die if they came. They would not be able to reach Drywater City at all. Therefore, after destroying the 3 orc cities and the orc shrine, Grim led the Devil Mechanical Legion on their way back without hesitation. He could not wait to rush back to Drywater City to see the arrangements of the Witch of Death. Destroying a plane. How do they do it? After 11 days of traveling day and night, the Magic Mechanical Army, led by Grim, became the first army to return to Drywater City. Their achievements were so brilliant that they were personally received by the leader of the Witch of Death, Thuna. Chapter 834. It had been less than half a month since Grimm and the others left Drywater City, but everything here had become so unfamiliar. The originally blue sky had now turned dark red. Strange and gorgeous elemental light ribbons floated in the air and intertwined with each other, forming a magnificent, bizarre, and terrifying scene. Fortunately, all the orcs within 1,000 miles of Drywater City were either captured by the witches or moved to a further place with their families. Thus, the strange scene here was not completely exposed. Before Grimm entered the orc meeting hall, he raised his head to look at the drifting lights that were almost pressing down on the roof. He could not help but sigh inwardly. The orcs did not have much time left. These seemingly unpredictable and beautiful multicolored illusory lights were not illusions, but real existences. They were mainly formed by the magical elements that leaked out of Drywater City, and they also indicated that the sacrificial ceremony that the Witches of Death were preparing had actually begun. However, in order to avoid alerting the orcs and inciting a riot, they did not launch a large-scale attack. The leader of the Witches of Death, Thuna, was waiting leisurely in the meeting hall, her exquisite and cold face expressionless. This made Grimm wonder more than once whether she had turned her body into an existence similar to a corpse. Otherwise, with the Witches of Death's habit of coming into contact with and absorbing negative energy all year round, her flesh and blood should not have been preserved. Of course, he could not rule out the possibility that this Witch of Death had practiced some kind of secret technique to protect her appearance from being eroded by negative energy. However, as a Witch of Death, she refused to fully embrace the power of death, which was obviously not in line with the principles of a Witch of Death. Hence, Grimm was fairly certain that under her exquisite and perfect face and skin was not fresh flesh and blood, but rotting flesh that had completely stiffened and died. Without the concealment of a secret technique, the horrible stench of her rotting flesh could be clearly smelled from 3 miles away. It was because of this understanding that Grimm wasn't bewitched by her cold and beautiful face. To a Tier 4 witch, the greatest value of her body was the terrifying power of death, not her so-called skin and appearance. Seeing Grimm and Alice walking into the hall side by side, the leader of the Witches of Death, Thuna, who occupied a high position, inexplicably felt a trace of anger in her heart. How could this Alice be so useless? She didn't seem to have bewitched the wizard, but was instead bewitched by him. How could such a witch be worthy of being one of the leaders? In fact, this was the common mentality of all northern witches. In the north, in the witches' territory, only powerful witches could enjoy luxury and honor. As for the wizards, they would either become subordinates or concubines. No wizard would be allowed to be above the northern witches. This kind of perverted and extreme witch supremacy was the mainstream ideology of the northern witches. As for the love between men and women, as for the mushy and hypocritical love, it did not exist in the minds of most northern witches. If it were not for personal physiological needs and the consideration of reproduction, many northern witches with extreme ideas would have sealed off the entire northern region and prevented any wizard from entering to bewitch or seduce young witches who were not strong-willed enough. From Thuna's point of view, Alice, as the leader of the Witches of Destiny, did not control the wizard under her like a plaything. Instead, she allowed him to come and go with her, eat and live with her. This was a sign of her corruption. However, Alice was still the leader of a faction. Although she was only a rank 2, she had the same authority as Thuna in the Witch Council. Therefore, even though she was unhappy, Thuna did not show it. Instead, she became more calm and steady. "You came back so quickly. Could it be that you've completed the task I gave you?" Her tone was cold and without warmth. However, for a rank 4 witch, her attitude towards Grimm and Alice was already considered gentle enough. If it were any other rank 2 witch, they would not even have a chance to stand up straight in front of Thuna. Although the rank 4 witch in front of him had delicate eyebrows and a pretty face, she had the demeanor of a little girl. However, the scene of her proudly standing on the back of the rank 4 zombie dragon Arteist and fighting against the rank 4 blue sky wing was still fresh in Grimm's memory. He did not dare to forget it. "It's done," Alice said with a smile. "These are the things we brought back." At her signal, Grim waved his hand, and 3 large bee-style flags made of animal hide appeared in the middle of the hall. As soon as the flag appeared, the Orc Assembly Hall was overwhelmed by an indescribable violent and barbaric aura. The rumbling sounds of the Orc race's drums, which were filled with a vigorous and desolate aura, echoed faintly in everyone's ears. The flags of Warhammer, Daka, and the Rockrock tribe. Thuna nodded expressionlessly, once again acknowledging their achievements. Out of the dozen or so which teams that had gone out, only Alice's team could complete the task and return to Drywater City first. To be honest, their task was not the hardest, but it was not the easiest either. The fact that they were able to return before the other teams showed how powerful and efficient Alice's team was. After all, there was no lack of rank 3 witches in the other teams. In Alice's team, apart from the unruly rank 3 Thunder Dragon, there seemed to be no other high-grade witches. Since they had completed the task, they naturally deserved the reward they deserved. Thuna flipped her palm, and 3 differently colored magic orbs floated in front of her. "These are the 3 high-grade knowledges we agreed upon. You can take them. Remember, only the members of the witches are allowed to use them. Do not spread them outside." Grim, who had been standing behind Alice without saying a word, suddenly had a bright flame in his eyes. His mind could not help but tremble. These were the only 3 high-grade knowledges he lacked at the moment. As long as he obtained them, becoming a rank 3 magus would only be a matter of time. As if sensing the passion in Grim's heart, Alice glanced at him, signaling him to calm down with her eyes. Only then did she step forward and put the 3 magic orbs into her bosom. "Since you've achieved your goal, will you still participate in the next battle? If you're willing to continue fighting for us Witches of Death, I have some things here that you can use." This time, Thuna took out a strange magic lamp. The simple and old lamp was engraved with dense and mysterious patterns, and a magic aura that overflowed from it was the power of destiny that made Alice's heart skip a beat. "The Guide of Destiny." Alice murmured the name of the magic lamp in a voice that was almost intonation. Looking at her expression, there was a great deal of reluctance and intense struggle. The Guide of Destiny was a weapon of destiny passed down by the ancient witches. This weapon was useless in the hands of other magi, but in the hands of a witch of destiny like Alice, it was no less powerful than a small divine weapon. If Alice could personally light this weapon before she swam the river of destiny, she would never be in danger of being lost in the forks and tributaries of destiny. No matter how dangerous the situation was, the Guide of Destiny would be able to safely bring her soul back to her body. This was the true meaning of the existence of the Guide of Destiny. Finally, Alice shifted her longing gaze away from the magic lamp and said in a resolute tone, "No, we Witches of Destiny are not strong enough to participate in the next battle. Our Destiny Witches are not strong enough to participate in the following battles. I hope to return to the Magus world as soon as possible." Grim, who was standing behind Alice, hesitated a few times and finally gave up. "All right then." Thuna smiled faintly. "You still need to stay in Drywater City for 3 days. 3 days later, we will hold the sacrificial ceremony. Before the ceremony, we will open a long-distance portal and send away a group of people. You can choose to leave at that time. All right, you can go and rest. Remember, don't leave the encampment for the next 3 days. If anything happens, we, the Witches of Death, will not be responsible." Thuna's words were not a joke. When Grim and Alice returned to the Orc Mansion with their family members, the gate was blocked by a group of undead. No matter how big the Orc Mansion was, it was stuffed with hundreds of metal magic machinery and dozens of magic chariots. There was almost no place to stand and rest. Fortunately, the metal magic machines did not require a place to rest. The goblins squeezed into one room to give the Crimson Sorcerers enough space. But when he returned this time, the Beastman's servants and maids had all disappeared. If not for the Thunder Dragon arms bringing the 4 foreign beauties with him, Grim and the others might not even have a kitchen made to cook for them. After returning to the orc mansion, Grim looked up at the dark red sky that was almost illuminated by the illusory light. He could not help but ask Alice, "Why did you reject Thuna? That thing seems to be very helpful to you." Alice stopped at the door and did not turn around. She silently shook her head. "It's not worth it. No matter how important the equipment is, it's not as important as my life." "You're saying there's danger here?" Grim was shocked. "There will be danger." Alice chuckled. "Don't look down on the gods just because it's easy these days. Once they show their true power, we'll just be a group of slightly stronger ants." Grim was silent for a moment and silently nodded. At this moment, the planar war in front of them was already showing signs of going out of control. Once the orc god Ash discovered the true intentions of the witches, he would definitely go crazy and take revenge. At that time, the war would quickly escalate. At that time, even the Grade 4 witches might not be able to dominate the battlefield. As for the Grade 2 magi like them, they would probably become slightly stronger ants, just as Alice had described. It was better to leave this place as soon as possible. Chapter 835. Beast God Calendar, Year 13775, 18th of November. It was also the 15th day since the witches invaded the Johnson Plain. The blood sacrifice ceremony that was expected had finally begun. Before dawn, a strong smell of blood had already enveloped the entire Drywater City. More than 200,000 orcs who had been captured by the witches in the early stage had instantly become souls under the sword, dying in the secret and terrifying blood sacrifice ceremony. The main sacrificial ground was, of course, arranged in the tallest and most magnificent hall in Drywater City. This used to be the temple of the beast god, but now it had become the main sacrificial ground for the massacre of the beast god's believers. The cruelty and bloodshed of the world were always like this, making people sigh and feel helpless. Up to 50,000 orc believers had their throats slit and were pushed into a temporarily dug deep pit. Warm blood flowed out of the grotesquely twisted corpses and gathered at the bottom of the pit. As more and more orcs were pushed into the deep pit, the blood slowly overflowed and began to soak the corpses at the bottom of the pit in the viscous red blood. The souls of the dead orcs slowly drifted out of the corpses and floated towards the high sky according to the laws of the plane. However, when they came into contact with the mud wall near the pit, mysterious runes that emanated magical fluorescence appeared and repelled them. The souls that could not smoothly return to the mother stream of souls became restless, and the eyes of the originally dull and lifeless illusory faces lit up with a glaring red light. They either crazily crashed into the mud wall, or stumbled in the pile of corpses, or cowered and cried on their knees. Many souls seemed to be unable to accept the reality that they were already dead. They were still wandering in the pile of corpses, trying to find their own bodies and return to the warm and peaceful world. As the orcs continued to die, more and more orc souls gathered in the deep pit. This place had simply become a noisy market. Wandering souls and ear-piercing screams filled one's eyes and ears. On the soil platform at the edge of the deep pit, more than 10 disheveled black-robed witches looked at each other and began to dance a strange and ridiculous dance around the pit of corpses. Following their vague, evil prayers, an evil power slowly flowed into the bottom of the pit, where it began to germinate. A moment later, a seed of evil that had been buried at the bottom of the pit broke out of the ground, and a black bud extended out of the blood and corpses. Relying on the strong death aura of the corpse pit and the joint efforts of the many witches of pain, this strange sprout began to grow and strengthen rapidly. Bam, bam, bam. The sprout actually opened a mouth full of fine white teeth and began to gulp down the blood in the pit of corpses. Its stem, which was originally only as thick as a finger, began to rapidly expand and thicken. Through the dark outer wall of the stem, one could vaguely see the cheerfully flowing blood-colored juice and lumps of muscles that had yet to be digested. Amidst a strange hissing sound, the small tip of the sprout split open and a dozen or so gossamer-like tentacles stretched out from within. As the tender shoot swelled and grew stronger, the tentacles also began to grow thicker and stronger. In the blink of an eye, these tentacles had become as thick as a python's. They twisted and wriggled, and suddenly pierced into the surrounding orc corpses. Then they crazily split, grew, and drilled into the orc's body. With the sound of swallowing, the orc warrior's originally strong and majestic body began to wither at a speed visible to the naked eye. Before the nutrients in the orc's body were completely devoured, new snake-like tentacles drilled out of the corpse's eyes, ears, mouths, and noses. Then they crazily pierced into the new body. It was like an evil tree that continued to grow crazily by devouring flesh and blood. In the blink of an eye, the snake-like vine tentacles had pierced through every orc corpse in the deep pit and hung them on its branches. From afar, the tens of thousands of orc corpses looked like fruits, hanging on this strange and creepy evil tree. Not only did the evil tree catch all the orc corpses in one fell swoop, the trunk of this evil tree that was already as thick as 50 meters cracked open again, and a dense swarm of strange gray mosquitoes flew out from within. These mosquitoes were like a black tide that quickly surged towards the orc souls. An orc soul that was originally incorporeal was suddenly covered in these gray mosquitoes, scaring the orc soul so much that it started to wail miserably. However, with a strange sucking sound, the orc soul's wails became softer and softer, and its soul shadow also became fainter and fainter. Finally, as the gray mosquitoes dispersed with a whoosh, the orc soul that was originally surrounded had completely disappeared. Although these orc souls had lost most of their memories, they still retained their instinctive ferocity and fear of death. Some orc souls were so frightened that they dodged in all directions, while others roared and charged forward, using their fists and legs to fight the gray mosquitoes. Unfortunately, these gray mosquitoes were the nemesis of spirits. No matter how the orc souls resisted and attacked, they couldn't hurt them at all. On the other hand, their long suckers could easily pierce into the soul shadow and collect the pure soul energy of the other party. The gray mosquitoes with bloated stomachs would fly back to the evil tree and give the pure soul energy they had absorbed to the evil tree itself. This action immediately sped up the growth and strengthening of the evil tree. A strange black barrier started to appear around the evil tree. Under the cover of the barrier, the law chains of the Johnson Plain appeared like silver chains. The strange evil tree reached out with snake-like tentacles, slowly extending towards the law chains of the plain. When the silver law chains came into contact with the black tentacles of the evil tree, a strange sound that made one's teeth ache and legs go weak sounded. Amidst the thick black smoke, the Johnson Plains laws began to exert a powerful backlash on the evil tree. The evil tree, which had been incomparably powerful just a moment ago, immediately burst open with bloody holes. Large amounts of blood, bones, and flesh splattered out. The evil tree writhed and trembled violently, letting out a sharp cry that shook people's hearts. The evil tree didn't have eyes, ears, mouth, or nose, so naturally it couldn't make a sound. This kind of cry only existed on the mental plane. All the magi, orcs, and other living beings in Drywater City heard this strange cry. Those with stronger mental fortitude were better off and managed to resist the invasion of the mental cry. Those who were rank 1 and below jumped high into the air, purplish-black snakes of blood seeping out of their eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. Their minds had suffered quite a bit of damage. Many individuals with weak mental energy even died from the aftermath of this mental energy wave. Almost all of the Tier 1 wizards that Grimm had brought into the Johnson Plain were injured. They held their heads in their hands and cried out in pain. As for the gnome engineers and technicians, not a single one was spared. They all died from the mental attack. This won't do. The decaying root isn't gaining any advantage against the plane's laws. Quick, bring the high-grade offerings here. Thuna, the leader of the Witches of Death, who had been observing intently, shouted loudly. Under her command, the orcs who were tied up were brought to the edge of the pit of corpses and then pushed in while they were still alive. Seeing the layers upon layers of corpses in the pit, as well as the strange and terrifying evil tree, the orcs twisted their bodies and cursed the witches. However, at this moment, countless black tentacles burrowed out of the pile of corpses, burrowing into their eyes, ears, mouths, and noses, drilling around under their brownish-green skin. The orcs' curses stopped abruptly. The scene was once again drowned out by the sounds of people gulping down blood. With the flesh and souls of this batch of powerhouses as backup, the evil tree that had just lost once again reached out with its black tentacles and forcefully pierced the chains of laws of the plane. Under the violent backlash of the plane, the chains of laws of the plane turned from a deep and reserved silver to a glaring gray. Suddenly, a strange cry that shook people's hearts rang out. At this moment, all living beings in the Johnson plane, regardless of race, gender, strength, or weakness, stopped what they were doing and turned their heads in a daze to look into the distance. Something bad seemed to be happening to them. Only the powerhouses with sharp minds, or those who had already begun to understand the laws of the plane, could deeply feel the intense hatred and anger coming from the plane's consciousness through the vibrations of the laws of the plane. Someone had deeply angered the plane's consciousness. It seemed to have even caused some damage to the plane's consciousness. The powerhouses couldn't help but be shocked. What was a plane's consciousness? It didn't have a physical body, and it wasn't just a body of consciousness either. It was a mixture of the consciousness of billions of matter and living beings in the entire plane. Before it grew into a large plane, this plane's consciousness was like a fetus in a plane. It didn't have a complete and independent consciousness, only some simple and crude instincts. Therefore, when these outsiders used some method to harm it, it felt a threat to its survival. Using this unique method, it deeply imprinted its hatred for the intruders into the souls of all the beings in the plane. The plane was its body, the plane's consciousness was its crude instinct, and the laws of the plane were the tools it used to control the plane. Now, some outsiders wanted to invade the plane's laws and fight it for control of the plane. This was definitely an unbearable enemy. Therefore, at this moment, this group of evil witches from the Magus world had successfully upgraded from terrifying enemies to irreconcilable enemies. Only those who had experienced it would be able to truly understand the terrifying consequences of such a thing. Grim pushed open the wooden window of his residence and looked at the terrifying dark red sky that looked like a pool of blood. For the first time, he felt the deep malice of the plane's consciousness. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.